Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to 2.5 Talent. It's been a hot minute. I think it's been about a month, probably. With our last one was the pre-major episode. Of course, now we're about 2 weeks post-major, but we've been busy. I've moved house. Trav and Paladin have been grinding some ECL as well, so it's been a busy time. But we're back. I guess we can start with introductions. What we boys been up to? I say obviously been working. Trav had a bit of work today. What have you been up to?
Yeah, I did some Asia ECL yesterday as well. I followed some Mongolian teams, IHC
Love
and
it.
Renewal, I believe as well, which was pretty fun. I done a couple of casts as well. I casted Espoo, of course. We haven't
Oh
actually been doing
yes, yeah.
this podcast for a little bit. We've all been very running around. You've been running around the country, and I've been running around the Counter Strike scene. So there you go, and that was a lot of fun. And of course, we'll get into that in this podcast. So looking forward to talking about it.
Annie, what have you got for me?
Honestly, since the major, I've been trying to catch up with how some of these teams are playing. I've been watching a lot of demos, casting some ECL. I've got some good ideas for just some videos in the pipeline that
Nice.
requires a lot of work,
Mhm.
and for that reason, I think this is like the perfect time for just catching up on demos, figuring out
Yeah.
how teams play. Also, been playing a ton of Anubis, just trying to figure out that map with whatever limited shitty player testing that I could do
Right.
before the World Finals because
Yeah,
I mean, I'm already
call
seeing some
outs.
really, yeah, I'm already seeing some great little things from some of these teams, and yeah, callouts is also super important. I mean, you don't know
Yeah, of
when
course.
some of these teams are going to start asking Anubis to be played within
That's
their
it.
tournaments, and knowing all those callouts beforehand will be definitely be a priority, I guess.
Yeah, I gotta admit, I still have. I mean, I saw Mighty Max Endpoint IGL do like a. He's normally whenever a map comes out, like he did it with Ancient, he's done it with Vertigo in the past. Like he'll kind of basically go around and label them essentially of what he thinks is like community wise best, but also player wise best, like what they can say kind
Yeah.
of quick enough. And I normally follow his, and it's normally probably like it's a bit of an industry standard, but so I think I need to go and take a look at his and then probably have a little run around myself. I've played it a couple of times though, and we'll get onto Anubis in a little bit. But I
We'll
guess
get
we
onto
can
it. Yeah.
start with, of course, what the entirety of this podcast is post major. That's been, that was the big talking point. We obviously did a fairly decent a couple of watch parties, and we can take a look. Of course, as we all know, outsiders. Not comfortable, but they took a victory over Heroic in the grand final. I don't think anybody would have predicted that. When you go, I had a little look back at kind of our podcast from last, like just before the major, and we were like, the conversation we were having, like, oh yeah, Faye's got a good chance, and Vitality as well, looking all right, and yeah, man, how wrong we were. I mean, and the only one we got even remotely close to was saying that Navi might potentially be able to find some form, and even then, they only finished fifth to eighth, so it wasn't exactly like it was anything star-studded. Initial thoughts was obviously we've spoken since and we did our watch parties, but what do you think happened? What do you think is the story of the major?
Trav, do you want to start? I mean, I'm
Ah.
still trying to accumulate my thoughts. I mean,
I
for
know
me,
it's a weird one because a lot of people will look at this major as disappointing, right? They'll look at it, oh, we didn't get a phase Navi Grand Final, oh, we didn't get this, we didn't get
Yeah,
that. But honestly, just thinking back on it now, obviously now it's sort of settled in our brains for a
of
little while.
course. Yeah.
It like phase. Considering how well they played, to be fair, in the blast of full final, which we'll get to obviously later on, I'm disappointed that they couldn't find a way past BNE because if they did, I think they could have made a really good playoff run
Yeah.
because they've still got form there that's hidden away. They're still a team that's ridiculously hard to beat in general. They
Yeah.
show up at these ridiculous scenarios. They win a Deagle Eco every now and then, and it gets them back into a game, which makes them like a final boss of CS
Of
almost.
course. Yeah. Yeah.
But they slip up against BNE and Navi, who of course we spoke up about in the previous pod that you just mentioned. Right now, they don't seem in a good place either. I mean, we've seen all those clips of Simple,
Yeah.
swearing away at some guy young and stuff like that. It's like, in
I would
general,
too.
it's not not seemingly a very comfortable environment in that team, and it doesn't seem like they're entirely sure of where they want to go as of yet. And of course, as I said, we'll get onto that with them trialing our lovely nipple in
Yes.
the world final apparently. So
Yeah.
yeah, I
Nipple.
think that's the reason why they didn't make it too far. And that Furia game was just an irresistible,
Yeah.
joyful watch of Counter Strike. Sure, you can criticize the crowd for not showing up as much for the other games, but that shit was glorious. It was wonderful.
Yeah, I gotta say, the only kind of negative I can think of the entire major, I think it was very good. I know, for example, Richard Lewis did a very good article kind of talking about stuff to do with goals as well, and how that really affected things kind of overall. But I think for me, the only negative I can take away from that major, it was a celebration of Counter-Strike, which is what majors should be, but on a massively international scale. The only thing I can take away is maybe the lack of support in some pretty important games. I think was it Mao's Outsiders in a semi-final? They walked out and it was just fuck all people there. I mean, that for me was, I mean, I kind of feel for them as well, because I mean, we never know when these young lot of Mao's are ever going to get to that stage of a major again, right? This, in a sense, because it was such an open major, it could be a bit of a flash in the pan. And the fact that these youngsters, their first semi-final of a major that they've ever had, and it's, there's about 12 people in the crowd because everyone's outside with the old SK core, signings or whatever, or with goals in the fan fest.
The Furia shop.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So they were everywhere
IEM
apart
goals.
from the game. Yeah, and I think there's a fair argument to be had there. I think in a way Richard Lewis is pretty spot on in saying they definitely pandered to goals in a way that maybe the focus should have been Counter-Strike and should have been in the arena when it wasn't. I think that was, a bit of an issue. But that was the only real negative. I think the Counter-Strike was fantastic. I think, in a way, for me, while we came into saying, it should be Na'Vi or FaZe in the final, I think that's what we were going for, pre-major episode. And we said, but potentially Vitality could find some of that EPL form from Pro League 16 and kind of carry it on or whatever. But I quite like that we had a bit of a change-up. I mean, to have FaZe and Na'Vi going rock bottom, I think is not something that anybody would have expected. That was for me just in itself already storylines being built up. So I don't know. I liked what we saw from the major. It was a celebration. It was a good one. Maybe
The Outsiders deserved it.
Exactly.
Genuinely.
My goat, James.
Yeah.
I got a new opinion or view of James. I always kind of thought that James' personality was going to be like his play style. Obviously, he's a pretty fucking boring player. Like, he's milquetoast as they come, right?
But the guy's hilarious.
Oh
His
my
English
god,
is so
he's
endearing.
the funniest dude. And I implore anybody, right, if you get a chance, go and check out his vlogs. They're brilliant. Like, him and Dastan just doing dumb shit in the hotel, like, so funny. Or like when he went to the Cresta Redeemer and stuff. Like, he's an emotive dude. He's nothing like his playstyle. So I'm probably to go have a look. But yeah, Paladin, what was your thoughts post major?
So okay, I think I've got it now. Basically, the audience situation for me is personally like secondary to kind of when you get to this champion stage, you want to have a top 8 that can consistently pump out some good storylines. Like you look at, I try to do a lot of the comparisons to some of the quote unquote worst majors, at least to community perspective. And that would be the Starladder major in Berlin and then the Face It major in 2018. Those are kind of lauded as the worst quote unquote majors. And I mean, at least in recency, obviously you can talk shit about all the earlier ones with the Olaf boost and whatnot. But in the Starladder major Berlin, you had Astralis, who weren't necessarily the #1 team in the world, but they were kind of like fighting back from their Blastralis period where they were trying to become a dominant team again. And you obviously had that insane quarterfinal against Liquid where they decided to pick Vertigo and like this very curveball-esque scenario. And then you had them play NRG in the semifinals, who they actually lost to in the BO1 stage in the Swiss stage for the Legends portion. So that was also a super exciting. So that entire half of the bracket was super exciting. NRG beating Na'Vi as well was also super interesting. Avantgarde upsetting over Vitality. We had a lot of great playoff games in that whole bracket, even though the final was a wash with Astralis dominantly winning over Avantgarde. And then in the Face It Major 2018, you also had some crazy runs. You had Liquid trying to bounce back, and they lost to Astralis again there, a huge kryptonite of them. And then MIBR also poised to do well against Complexity. The surprise 3-0 team with Ye and Def and all those boys. And then you had Na'Vi come out on top over MIBR. That was also very close 2-0.
That was
and then
again
Astralis.
That was Stewie Tarek MLVR, right?
I believe so. Yes, that was Stewie Tarek.
The good old bad old times.
And then you had like a potential of an Astralis Na'Vi final with Simple in red hot form. This was like peak Simple against Astralis. Obviously, things didn't go as planned. Simple absolutely disappeared, and Astralis were just the most dominant team of all time. And that's just how it is. But at the same time, all of these top teams are still within the tournament, and you still have a very competitive top 8 overall.
Yeah.
But in the Rio Major, the storylines kind of drop off, and we don't necessarily have like beyond the whole concept of like, oh, the parity of some of the world's best, or it's actually much closer than we think.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that concept, we didn't necessarily have the best of the best playoff games. I mean,
Agreed.
the Mao C9 game, C9 kind of just disappeared on
Mhm.
that ancient. And I've seen so many different people talk about it, but they gave Xerxen a life game.
Yes. Yeah.
What I mean by that is not necessarily that Xerxen played well, but they played right into his hands. I mean, I'm
I agree.
talking zero utility in cave, going in 1-by-1 spacing, just absolutely piss poor. This T side looked absolutely abhorrent, and they just kind of like handed the keys to Mouse and say, go play outsiders in the semi. And then even in the Furia Navi final, or sorry, quarterfinal, you had that Mirage game. I don't think Furia had the craziest T side that you can say is like a Cinderella run. It was very much, we're going to hit the A bomb side. We're going to do the same A execute. We're going to miss utility. And we're going to make SDY uncomfortable. We're going to make SDY look like an absolute buffoon on the A site, make him play around smokes that he shouldn't normally be playing around. He gets absolutely trounced by players like Art, and Furia run away and actually crumble one of the teams that don't actually look like would ever be phased by an audience, but you had Simple flipping off audience members at the
Yeah.
end of it. Which, look, I
God.
understand why he did it,
Mhm.
but still, it's very uncharacteristic of a team like Navi, who are an organization that has been attending all of the majors in existence. They're a very tenured organization that don't actually get phased by situations like this. And then after all that being said, okay, sure, we have all of these upsets. And now you have kind of a clear path for Furia to make it all the way through.
Mhm.
And still, they don't actually get the job done. Heroic overpower them. And that's even after a scenario where I felt like Furia had an opportunity to close out Ancient, but they just couldn't get the job done there as well. And then you kind of had a very meager final with Outsiders being very clearly the better team and Heroic just absolutely disappearing,
Yeah.
especially in that overpass game. It just felt like Outsiders were fully in control. But basically, the point I'm trying to make here is that we didn't necessarily, beyond the Furia Navi game, and even that is kind of like a stretch, I'd say. It wasn't necessarily like peak Counter-Strike. Maybe in terms of like kind of a moment in history, it's pretty interesting. But beyond that, every single other game was kind of like, it happened. That series happened, and
Yeah.
it's in the history books. And that's what's kind of like a bummer to me. It's not necessarily that the audience didn't show up or whatnot, because at the end of the day, we are spectators from at home, and we're watching kind of the viewing experience. So if the CS is good, it doesn't matter, right? We can just enjoy it for what it is. We can reflect on it in months later, and say like, look, this kind of happened. We can compare it in history and enjoy and reflect upon it in that sort of way. But we can't necessarily do that for this major, and that's what's a bummer for me. Like
I agree.
I'm already gonna like kind of look at the Blast Major and say that it's probably going to be better, just because some of these teams will probably be much more ready for a tournament like Blast. But that's just me.
I think as well, there's like, you can just say that for the most part, most of the playoff games will just be forgotten. I think it's quite sad, but it's true. I think like it'll get to a point where even where we've had, quote unquote bad majors in the past, like even like for example, I always look back to the Avangar Astralis one, but like the rest of the games, while we had some of the big hitters as you mentioned, I think you can even see in terms of viewership numbers. I think I saw I think it's esport charts or whatever they're called, and they do like the stats for all the big tournaments, and every major that we've had has basically always had more and more viewers. PGL Antwerp was the most views we've ever had at a major or a major final. And obviously Stockholm behind that, and basically just goes in chronological order. And then this was, behind both Stockholm and Antwerp in terms of viewership. So you could tell that people just generally didn't care that much. I think, for the Outsiders team, maybe, with all the stuff that's going on with VP and whatnot, their kind of viewership numbers as an organization isn't as dedicated as it kind of used to be way back when. And for Heroic, they are always going to, not always, but they still are at the moment kind of second fiddle in terms of Danish viewership to Astralis. Like even when Astralis plays shit, they still are the story of Denmark over Heroic, who are always going to be that second choice. So yeah, I think you're right. I think Blast already looks like it potentially could be the best just in terms of the teams itself, and obviously one of the issues of the people the stuff that people like to kind of hone in on, which is like, oh, where's the crowd, and crowd cheating and whatever. But I gotta say, for me, well, obviously there was the bad bits of like Mao's Outsiders. That semi was pretty brutal when they were walking out, and there was just like 7 people on each side. It was like pretty rough. But when Furia did play, Jesus, like that was like, even sitting at home, like you kind of got like you got goosebumps a little bit when you hear the sound on, you hear the crowd, and that was nuts. So I think there was that's a noise I've never heard before, and I never felt that kind of way about CS. And it's 2 teams that I didn't really care about, but that was nuts.
I've got to say that ESL still put on like a very good show. Like I'm not going to necessarily like dock them. I mean, beyond the galas and fan fests and situation, that's something that you can learn from, because it is the first time that you've done something like that. But I will definitely ding them for that. But beyond that, I mean, the stage setup itself was always something that I'm going to be talking about for a while now, because I love center stages. I love what they did. I mean,
the facing each other thing was cool.
Yeah, like the fireworks setup from the top down with the lights. Like that was really cool. I like the walkouts. Like everything
and the
champion stage later was awesome.
The stage host and the way that it lines up when they're in the middle of the stage and then they walk around to their seats, like it felt right. It felt like a really good way to do it.
Yeah, it was, it deserving. I mean, sometimes you see some of these big stages and they're just kind of just the most average stage with a few, a bit of a flamethrower coming through, and that's it. Like, I gotta say, I think when I went to Stockholm for the major, it wasn't, I don't remember the stage, is how I'm gonna put it. I think it was okay. And probably the coolest thing about it was maybe, when the bomb went off, flamethrowers went up. But that's kind of a bit of a standard now anyway. So, that's memorable. That kind of like, globe in the middle kind of thing. So I think ESL did a lot right, but there definitely is a lot to learn from. And obviously they'll know that, especially with like, Richard Lewis's article. I think he pretty much hit the nail on the head. There was no better way of putting it. There was obviously, we could probably even kind of briefly mention and talk about it. There was obviously, a fairly decent amount of controversy there as well, in terms of, obviously there was Sado. That was probably the biggest one to kickstart things.
He wasn't even in the credits.
Yeah,
he was omitted from the credits, because I made sure, because actually, genuinely, one of my favorite things to do, because I'm sentimental, is whenever a big event ends, I watch the ESL broadcast all the way through to the end of the credits. It's like the music is big, everyone in chat is like spamming Bible thump and everything. Like it just feels right, So I'm really sentimental about sporting events and Counter-Strike events like that. So I looked at it. I was like, "Oh yeah, he's been omitted from the credits. Oh dear." And the weird thing is that he's still been tweeting every now and then about his racing stuff, and he's been streaming and stuff. But I think he's just ignoring all the questions about it. I think that obviously stems from the fact that the report about it was seemingly accurate. Unfortunately,
I think
it's a shame because. It's a shame because I've always loved his commentary. I think nearly everyone in the scene is on board with the fact that they love his commentary. It's just that the fact is that talented people quite often have significant flaws, and I think that's what we have to say.
We only see the good bits as well. I mean, of Sado, I think on the surface he's a kind of a very kind of fun-loving dude in a way, and obviously unbelievable at his job. But yeah, it's like you said. I think when you spend a lot of time in the limelight, and of course with the money that they get, there's always going to be stuff that comes around and is a bit of a problem. And obviously, I don't think him and Alco were best mates for a long time. Of course, he already got cancelled once. For basically how alcohol spurred him on to say a derogatory term. So I think it is, it's unfortunate in a way, but hopefully it's a bit of a kick up the arse, I guess, to get a bit of help, because I think he does need some help. I think it's probably the better way to put it. This isn't the first time thing. I think if it was first time that he just got drunk and just couldn't control himself, I think he maybe would have got away with it, but it's not the first. And I think that's the unfortunate factor of it, that for him potentially might be him done.
When it happened, like when the news was out as well, like he immediately changed his Twitter bio to
thanks for your time.
Thank you for your time. Yeah. Like it's just sad. Like
I think it might
you
be
don't want to go out that way. Yeah, you don't want to go out that way.
Is.
It is sad, but
to me, it's such a bummer, because I mean, Sado and Henry was my favorite duo of all time, and I like that. That is really what made me like fall in love with the esports side of things. Like I was already hooked into kind of the players and the personalities that we had, but it was different with the casting side of things, because for me, it was kind of like secondary, but for them, it like really made me realize the kind of the ceiling of CS casting.
Yeah.
But at the same time, just being muddled in controversy time in and time out it's just not good for our esport in general. Like we can't allow for things like this to happen in some of the biggest events that our scene has to offer. Like you don't want to be in a situation where a major is being riddled with these conversations of people that shouldn't necessarily be the focal point of the major. Like honestly, like I think one thing that Richard Lewis has brought up multiple times is that we as broadcast talent aren't necessarily the focal point. We shouldn't be doing the whole talent announcement thing, and really the big part of the whole broadcast scene is that we're supposed to be molding into the background, putting a show on for you guys of the players that are watching.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
we're trying to bring up the product, and we're kind of background actors with hands off, because the game should speak for themselves.
Like traditional sports. I mean, name 5 commentators from football in England or football in America, right? I mean, I think I can probably name about 3 that still do it, and even that's because I'm pretty diehard in football. So
and we're watching the World Cup.
Exactly,
well,
and
so
even then,
like,
you very rarely see them ever get like announced. I mean, there's no announcement. It's not like England style. It's not like
it'll
Peter
be like
Drury's doing it. Yeah, exactly.
It'll be like a top left little announcement. It's like a
10
very
seconds
small
tops.
box. Yeah. You don't necessarily have this pomp and circumstance around it. And personally, I mean, I personally, I'm in the same boat. I mean, obviously, I love attention. I mean, who doesn't? And it's great. It's great to have a little bit of an announcement here or there. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think the big priority of everything is that if we can provide good analysis for you, like make you understand how the game is working, make you feel excited about what's coming in certain rounds, that's all that we have to do. That's our job. That is all that we're required to do in our job description. Not be a celebrity, not try to put on a like a spectacle in terms of kind of tidbits and whatnot. I mean, I don't know. For me, I don't think that Stato should be allowed in the scene again. I think it's a very safe statement to say, but
I have to agree.
It's mostly because of just I don't want us to be muddled in controversy for situations like this ever.
He's a brand risk, isn't he? That's probably the best way to put it. I mean, obviously, the statements he said years back were bad enough that a lot of people wouldn't really recover from that. Then, of course, there was the homophobic one in the RMR. That I'm actually
some questionable tweets as well, which
questionable
he never deleted.
Tweets, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's it's an accumulation, but I think basically trying to physically abuse Gorse and his man is not the one.
There are 2 things. There are 2 things from it. One, I think it's pretty handy that ESL had Anders on hand, who goes well with Moses anyway, from their Blast partnership. So that was also pretty handy, and that means that Alan got more of a chance to do some Telestrator stuff and alongside Mahone and stuff, which was great to see. And just to follow on from what Paladin said, which I completely agree with, like for football broadcasts, for even like stuff that I watch too, like tennis, snooker, for example, even that sport, is a case of you'll interview the commentators sometimes that the broadcast host will ask for your opinion, or ask what you think about the game, but that's maybe the limit as how far it goes, and then the commentators will then maybe get a chance to interview players of their own in certain scenarios. But when they're announced, it's like, okay, we'll go to, let's use a football example for the World Cup. We'll take you to Guy Mowbray and Jermaine Genius for the game. Like that's literally all you say. Like you get a name check at the beginning, and you get your name in the top left, and that's it. There's no talent announcements for main sports, and maybe that's the way to do it. I agree with Paladin. I like being in the announcement. It's cool. It's fun. It makes you feel proud, but maybe it's not necessary.
Yeah. And because it spotlights you, it really spotlights the negative side of things as well. So it's an unfortunate part of the job where you really can't fuck up. I think your reputation is so big, and anything that happens, you will always kind of be remembered for it. And unfortunately for him, I don't think there's a way back in. I mean, I don't know what the plans for him. Apparently, you say he does racing stuff. I've heard that. Is it East like sim racing, whatever it's called? Is that what he does?
There's a lot of sim racing and streams that I think it's like Assetto Corsa and iRacing and stuff like that, if I'm not mistaken.
So I mean, still in a job, but I think his priority should be getting some help, because it seems like alcohol is not a good friend. But onto a slightly more brighter note. Oh, I guess one other thing that's probably worth mentioning. You kind of slightly alluded to it, Paladin, but I think it was kind of one of the bigger talking points, especially in the playoffs, was obviously Simple and the crowd, right? That was quite the issue in some ways, because Simple came out obviously, there was the first map, Na'Vi take it, Simple stands up, hands to the ears, he's playing the devil, we love to see it. I think that's always a good thing.
They should have lost that map though.
Exactly.
Furia could have won all three of the maps in that series.
100%. But I think there's definitely, I think, generally sports and production, all that, it needs villains, and, Simple was playing into it really well, where you got kind of people like Cadian trying to do his best to just like suck up to the Brazilian crowd, which didn't end up working because they ended up just not really giving a shit about him. But he tried his fucking hardest to just bomb lick the Brazilian crowd, and they did for about 2 minutes, and then they're like, all right, back to Furia. But Simple did a good thing. I think the villain story is quite fun. Obviously you can see the reaction. I mean, it was all over Twitter the second he did it. Obviously it came back to bite him, but that is part of it. You're not always gonna be. It's just part of the parcel.
2 points to that is, one, yes, I like it. Two, we need to make sure that fans respect the villain arc and don't like spit at him or anything.
That's what I was going to bring up.
Yeah. Okay, so there you go.
So that because that can't that was obviously probably the most dramatic part about it, was the fact that he's walking. He's walking up between maps 2 and 3, and someone just spits on him, which. I mean,
yeah. I think somebody spit on his teammate, and it is what he said, and he was like,
right.
And he was like super defensive about it, and he flips off the audience, I guess. But
and also that's quite a funny video / picture, to be fair.
Yeah,
but it was funny without context, and then you got the context. You're like, oh shit! Like I guess in a way, like fair play to backing your boys in a way.
It was very uncharacteristic of Simple just throughout the whole thing. Like he tweets out that like, I don't want to be booed, guys. Like, don't boo me. I mean, you're the GOAT, man. Like, I mean, you're the GOAT. Like, you shouldn't be worried about any of this kind of stuff. But I don't know. It felt like it kind of got under his skin a little bit. It just in the back of his mind, like that this crowd is against him. Everything is against him right now. And then you started to see even in that nuke map where he was trying to take so many different risks, and he wasn't hitting those like simple easy shots. Not like they're not actually easy shots, but for Simple,
easy for him.
He makes them look easy, right? And a lot of those shots just went awry, and that game should have been lost, but they won because of 5-7s, basically. And beyond that, like everything, it just seemed to get under his skin, and it's something that's been talked about for a little bit by a couple of different people of. When are we going to start dinging Simple for some of his major failures? Because he's had a lot of opportunities, and he's botched some of them. He's obviously converted one. And I think that it's very interesting because we don't really know how many majors Simple has left in his career.
True.
And we don't know who's next up to bat, obviously. And so eventually, I think that if we had to ever have like a thing to ding Simple in like his illustrious career, it might be the whole major performance angle. But I'm curious to see what you guys think about it because it's a very interesting angle.
Yeah. I think for me that there's no doubt is the go. I don't think at the moment, especially with kind of word about Source 2 and potentially I think if we're gonna say there's a new edition coming to CS:GO or something or whatever, it will be within the next kind of at least next kind of 5 years potentially or whatever. I don't think that'll ever change in my eyes. I think he will always be seen as the GOAT. But yeah, I think you're spot on, right? I feel like he's had so many opportunities and fluffed so many of them. I mean, Antwerp for me again looked like it could have been the perfect opportunity for him to go back to back. And then I think if he goes back to back, then there's never this conversation, right? We don't ever, if he goes back to back and he cements that Na'Vi era, then we're like, okay, sick. He did it over the course of 9 months, basically. So from Stockholm in late 2021 to kind of mid to late 2022, then we're like, sick. Like he's done his thing. But I mean, obviously faced with a better team of the day, there's no doubt about it. And then since the player break, it's been a pretty brutal watch. I can't lie. I mean, it's just been this side getting worse and worse. I know everyone likes to lynch onto SDY, and there's, we'll talk about that a little bit later when we bring in the GOAT nipple. But it's not always him, and you can kind of see if you just look at the stats. So Simple, he is going down a little bit, and he has been since the player break. And yeah, I think there's a world in which there has to come asterisks to the conversation of the GOAT. Like, he's the GOAT, but he could do it all the way up into the last hurdle, and then he would fluff his lines. And I think obviously it wasn't the last hurdle here, but for Na'Vi, there's no better way of putting it. It was a pretty bad performance. They should have gone way deeper than the way they did. They came in as one of the favourites in the tournament, where there really was it was impossible to say there was a favourite. I mean, everyone knew this before the tournament. We were always going to be making the jokes about how it's going to be impossible to get a diamond coin, and of course, it was basically impossible. But
silver, by the way.
I got gold. So what'd you get, Paladin?
Gold.
Try,
I'm not
you
a
absolute
silver scrub.
peasant.
Fuck you all.
Peasant. Silver
but
bot.
anyway, just to mention what you say as well, like I think the one like significant choke that I can remember from Simple in any major match was the Katowice-Ents game where he had that 1v1 against X7, I think it was. That's it just sticks in your memory of one that if he'd won that Navi could have made the final, and who knows if they'd have beaten Astralis, right? But people will say, look at Dev1ce's achievements. Even Dev1ce admittedly himself said that he lucked, that era was like almost lucking into it with the way the meta sort of worked out and how perfect it was for them for that period of their life. But yeah, I completely agree that Simple is the GOAT, but I think he needs one more major. I think he's got one more in him. Any more than that, I'm not sure, because we're going to get onto like the level later on in the pod, but like the level of Counter-Strike right now is not, no one's breaking clear, no one's making an era for themselves.
Exactly.
FaZe were the closest this year. They had a good 6 months of being absolutely ridiculous. But really it's no longer than that. And as you say, it's the decline of a player that's been around for that long tends to happen. We see that, right? I can only think of a few players who, especially ones who have dropped down to tier 2, which again we'll get onto later with Kenny, have really consistently stayed at an amazing level because of how high that tier 2 level is, especially on online Counter-Strike, which can be so inconsistent. In Simple's case, it's a little, obviously he barely plays online because he's always attending all the LAN events, but the longevity of a player like that, like Elise, for example, if you look at Elise, he's been ridiculously, like obviously a very different player, but he's been insane for Liquid since he joined the team in 2015. It's one of the longest periods
he's eternal,
on a roster. And it's absolutely brilliant. But in the last year or so, you can see while he does have impactful games and big performances still, there's that odd game that creeps in more often than it used to, which is poor and below the standard that we hold him. And it can happen with all those players, Crims, all those players that have been around for a long time on one particular organization. So it's an interesting discussion. But I think Simple, as I said, I think he's got one more in him. Any more than that, that may be a bit beyond him, because he needs to be settled. He needs to have a team that he's comfortable with, i.e. another player that we're going to get onto now. And perhaps as well, outside the server, he needs to be mentally on it, because obviously there's so many other outside scenarios which are rough right now for him and his country.
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, another thing we can move on, I guess now, if you guys are done in terms of your major stuff, we can move on, of course, to the next side of things, which is Elisa. And now this was, the tournament basically just straight after the major. I mean, there was very little time. Fnatic ended up coming first place, Big in towards second, Charlotte third, fourth, Sprout third, fourth, etc., etc. First thing, just for me, I want to give a quick shout out to the 500 guys. Those Bulgarians, they actually impressed me. I mean, I didn't even expect them to make it top 10. Never mind getting another 5th, 6th. So I was pleasantly surprised with how 500 performed. But yeah, I mean, this was classed as S tier, I'm pretty sure. Just after
it was A tier in the end.
Was
They downgraded it 1.
They changed it. Okay, good.
Because
I was gonna say, so when they first announced the tournament, I think they announced it when ENCE was like second or third in HLTV, and they were the only announced team for like a while, like even before the Mouse announcement.
Yeah, I think they have a partnership as well. I'm pretty sure.
Right,
Espoo, they're both Finnish. Espoo and ENCE have some sort of partnership in some way.
So ENCE is actually sponsored by Elisa.
Yeah, that's it.
Like the telecommunication
company or whatever.
Yeah. So and then I think they downgraded it after, because look, this tournament it could have been even better than it actually was, but we were muddled with so many different stand-in situations. T&AHT had to play with Pepsor. Big didn't have Searson. Astralis, as Astralis, you can talk about that for days on end.
Yeah.
Who else? I think Sprout played with Barry at one point, which was
early doors, right?
One match with Barry. Launex was feeling unwell, I believe.
Yes,
like that was a bummer. And like all in all, like and Mouse didn't even play the tournament because they went deep in the playoffs. They didn't want to go through jet lag and all of that. They kind of had an expectation that in case we made the final, we didn't want to just immediately fly out after. So all in all, this tournament could have been even better. But beyond that, I still think that I'm very happy that we have a tournament like this in the calendar.
Yeah.
I want more tournaments like this. I love like A-tier tournaments have my whole heart because it really is like the people that love CS past just the big organizations watch these types of
Of
tournaments
course,
a
yeah.
lot.
Had
And
decent viewership as
it's
well, to be
what's
fair.
yeah, no, they actually did pretty well. I mean, I have some qualms with like some of the things that they did. Like, I didn't like the format per se.
I agree.
With the best of ones, it kind of made things a little too volatile for my liking. But when the playoffs hit, I thought the crowd was pretty decent. I thought the stage was decent enough. I thought I liked the UI. I got the job done. I think that if they got just if they just spent a little bit more money trying to develop everything, I'm sure with the kind of viewership that they had, they'll definitely like have more support to put on a bigger
Yeah.
event.
I think planning was bad. That's the only thing I can give. Like, I mean, obviously, I think I saw. I mean, I sent a couple to you, Paladin, but it was like, a few days where in the arena viewership was pretty lackluster, and you're like, shit. Like, I hope this doesn't last, but like, I mean, thankfully it didn't. I mean, but I think the only thing, and obviously, Trav, you can definitely give us more information on it. You worked it, like, fucking hell. Some of the days that you had to do, and obviously I'm not going to talk about, but for the pay you were doing as well is brutal. Like
well,
like 12-hour days or something.
It was
never
more the
should
fact.
happen.
It was more the fact that obviously I genuinely wanted to do the event because it was a high quality event, especially post major as well. And I was very happy with the day I managed to do. I think I started first game was around about, obviously you have to wake up a little bit earlier for like tech checks and everything. I think the first day I got up at sort of got ready was on my PC ready at like 8 a.m. and it ended around, I think, probably past 8 p.m. 9 p.m. So yeah, it's pretty wild. And that's only BA1s as well. I got a screenshot actually. It's on my. I'll just quickly
the thing
scroll.
is what I don't
I know it's here.
because am I right in saying they weren't in the arena, those best ones?
It was a studio phase. It was a studio phase.
Why have they not? Why are they not over 2 days and not 4? Like, I'm sorry, like, who the fuck is watching 13 hours a day of CS:GO? Like, I mean, everyone was burnt out from watching the major anyway. This is like this thing started about 3 days after the major, so most people are burnt out anyway. And the people that are watching are either absolutely die hard or had it on the background. I'm not gonna lie, I barely watched any of it. Because I was very burnt out for watching CS. We did a fairly decent amount of the watch party stuff. I more or less watched every single game of the major. I mean, it's kind of our job, but yeah, I mean, when it came to Elisa, it was just I was already burnt out, and then they're doing like, and I saw the schedule when it was like, it was like, what was it, like 10, 11 best of ones in a day?
Seven BA1s it was, but if you listen to the matches that I did, we've got Big 16-13 over Heat, Sprout 16-14 over Heat, Big 16-11 over Sprout, Big 19-15 Havu, Game Legion 16-14 Big, Sprout 16-8 Havu, and then to end off the day, and one of actually my favourite games this year actually, Sprout 25-23 Gamer Legion. That was an absolute humdinger of a finale to end off that day. And I've got to say, I agree. It was a long day, but I genuinely enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. The production could have been a little bit better in terms of the studio phase. There's a few bits and pieces where I would get cut off and they did a transition and stuff like that. Little things to iron out which they can fix for the future. But yeah, I think in general, what I've heard from Mike J and Dreg, of course, who casted the arena phase, in front of the crowd, like everyone, especially that stage of the event, everyone was hugely gave it a lot of huge praise. Like everyone was very positive. All the people that came around and said came around and watched, like all the higher ups as well, all said it looked really good. Crowd was great, and it exceeded expectations. So that, as Paladin said, I completely agree. I was having a chat with our mate Brian Paladin about this the other day, right? And he just hates the fact, and we both actually kind of hate the fact that the scene is dominated by ESL and Blast. It's great for high tier Counter Strike, and it's great for our jobs as well, sure. But like to have those events that we don't have anymore, Epicenter, Star Ladder, all those bits and pieces that are missing from the calendar now. Yeah, that especially too. To have a tournament like Elisa is nice to have in the calendar for sure.
No, I always think diversity is good, always.
Yeah, you have a situation where, I mean, ESL and Blast, they kind of don't share the same amount of talent, and a big thing that we had with those 8-tier tournaments is you'd find a way to meld both of those halves of Counter Strike, and you get just interesting. I mean, you just get interesting combinations of teams, broadcast talent, tournament style, like and just a change in UI sometimes could just be a different thing, or like a change in location. Like some of these things are very small, but they keep the circuit fresh. They make everything feel like, that there is a circuit to it all, and that it's all working in harmony with one another. So personally, I am a huge fan of A-tier tournaments. And while it won't produce kind of, like the greatest Counter Strike you've ever seen, it still provides a very safe spot for your bigs, your Fanatics, your teams that are kind of hovering within that top 15, top 10 area, and battling it out and actually understanding where they lie in the HLTV rankings makes the kind of S tier tournaments seem that much better. Because one thing's for sure, you can't have all the tournaments be big, because
Exactly.
then none of them would be big, right? And that's just a big issue that ESL and Blast are both running into right now, where you have all of these IEM events, but not all IEM events can be the biggest IEM event. Like, it's just not possible, right? You've got to have some parity between all of these types of tournaments, and that's what A-tier tournaments are so good at, because you make them great products with lower tiered companies like in Elisa, who have been grinding in that tier 2 space for a while. And then once you create storylines for those S tier events to make them the biggest that you've ever seen. You can make an argument that now Fnatic is like one of those teams that have won a LAN title, and now they're kind of proven, and you can draw narratives there to make these teams more interesting. So overall, it's very healthy for the scene. It makes everything just more exciting for squads that you might not necessarily have on your radar, because they kind of just come in that like weird, like almost playoff team, but not really, in like a Katowice or a Cologne, because they're just bigger teams and you just never talk about them.
Of course.
So it's exciting to have that kind of conversation about a squad like Fnatic or a team like Big,
and to talk about them in general as well. Like, I'll just summarize my thoughts quickly on those two teams that you mentioned. Big playing with, I do believe, I managed to talk about it on a couple of other podcasts as well. Jeff from Liquipedia put that one out. Playing with that, like their 9th different team composition at a LAN event this year.
Damn.
We got like different coach as well. Like they replaced God B to replace NKJ, to bring in God B. And then they had, they got rid of Tizian, they put Keto in the coach slot for a Blast event. They brought in Crimbo, they brought in Sin. It just got rolling door of big players, and they've still managed to have a pretty consistent year in making the grand final as well, which is why I'm so impressed with them in general. The leadership, I guess, of Tabson and Gobby is one to always rely on and feel comfortable in. And the same can be said for Fnatic, because they played with Pepsaw. Crims was out with an injured, I think, injured arm or injured hand, one of the two.
Yeah, I remember seeing that's some wrist injury, I think.
Yeah. And they played very well, and Pepsaw played great as well. And we saw that as well. Pepsaw had a decent first stint when he stood in for Fnatic. Then the second stint was, at the end of that stint, got pretty poor. And he's back in the third stint after getting some confidence back in Fnatic Rising. And guess what? Look, he's playing really well. So that's what is great to see. And I think the final point I was going to make, of course, is about Astralis. Actually did better than I thought. I'm very disappointed that we didn't see Dev1ce actually play there. Like, come on, mate. Like,
Land
please
dodger.
just grow up and play the fucking event, for fuck's sake. Like, you're in Copenhagen for Blast in front of everyone. Why can't you be in front of everyone in Finland? Like, it's not that far away. It's still a Nordic country.
It's really like an hour tops on a flight.
Like, please fucking play it. I'm sure it's been announced he's going to play CCT in North Europe, which we'll get into next. But like, Astralis did decent with Krista as well. Like, he definitely didn't play amazing, but he had a certain number of situations where, I think on that final day in the game versus Complexity could have either finished first in the group or 6th. And I think a couple of really impactful rounds from him made it so that Complexity couldn't make it through. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, just to kind of summarize my things at the end, I think, like you said, for me, I love Blast and ESL because they are great companies to work for as commentators, and they are the reason that we are allowed to be, full-time commentators. Because they take up the bulk of the calendar and they hire us. It means obviously we get to work a job that is a dream, right? So obviously, only positive things with them. But it is really nice to see different things happen and have a little bit of diversity within the calendar. Not even in terms of a work sense, because I think it forces the likes of ESL and Blast, the big hitters, to stay on their toes. They know that there's a world. Obviously, I'm never ever going to say that Elisa or any of kind of these tier 2 tournaments are going to outshine ESL and Blast. First of all, they don't have the money to do so, but you know the scope of their tournaments, that's not what they're looking for. But it just forces Elisa and Blast on their toes and actually adapt and continue to improve and continue to be better.
It only takes one or two ideas, you know? Like,
Exactly.
you think about Flashpoint with the skits.
That's
and
it.
after how good those skits were, immediately after that, ESL had to quickly follow up with it. And now you see so many skits from them, and they're really funny. We have some really funny personalities in our space.
Exactly.
We've got some great skits. So just stuff like that. I think you're absolutely right. You just one or two ideas can completely change the scope of how people approach the conversation about like kind of shoulder content and just like little things. Like, I mean, even we play with the heart rate monitor, like stuff like that. Like, things like that just kind of add a better experience. I think you're completely right.
I think we play also set a bit of a benchmark about how kind of studio lands should be as well, like how good quality they can be. Of course, you know, it's unfortunate for them with the kind of the geopolitical situation, meaning that, you know, we haven't seen one of them since like season 3, I don't think. But you know, they did at least force Studio Lands to kind of improve their setup, not just be like some dinky shit room which looks horrible. They've actually forced people to make them look good as well, so it's a decent viewing experience. But yeah, I think, you know, for the most part, very, very good stuff. The only other negative I'd say, and I think maybe this was because of Miles dropping out, but Harvu being brought in, I thought was a bit of a piss take, just because Harvu are fucking dog shit, like absolutely piss poor. Like I would happily put my money where my mouth is and say Endpoint or ITB or One Pin from the UK would have been a fucking better choice, because Jesus Christ, they are shit, and they have been for like a year and a half. But I'm assuming it's probably because they're local.
You're saying that Havu would have got to? Are you saying that One Pin would have got to overtime against Big? You're saying One Pin would have taken 12 rounds off of Ents? Would have taken 13 rounds off of Game Legion?
I reckon One Pin could put Game Legion through their paces. I mean, I even stand where I say, like, I mean, One Pin they only competed in the first 2 qualifiers for the Open RMR because the guys were busy for the second 2, but they made like was it top 32? They made HLTV both times, just top 32.
Both times,
and then the people that they lost to, every single one of them qualified. They beat Saw. They beat all of these people. Like, One Pin have a record against Saw of like 6 wins, 1 loss in the last like year. Like these guys, they're much better than Saw. And Saw were here, right? So I would comfortably say that
Saw had a very easy path to qualify. It was
exactly. So I mean, I know in like ESA Advanced and stuff, One Pin have like only lost to Saw like once in the last year, and they've beat them like 6 times or whatever. So yeah, as we stand, I think that was the only negative I can say. But I'm assuming that's probably just because Miles dropped out, and I think Harvey the replacement for Miles, something like that. But in the grand scheme, that's the only real negative I can say. And of course, obviously, like the long days that you had, but also from a viewer experience, it was fucking long, because like 12 hours of watching CS, most people work full time, and of course, even for us who are freelance. I don't want to be watching CS for 13 hours a day. At least I want to, you know, kind of diversify my day a bit. You know, go outside. So that's the only negative I'll say. But yeah, in the grand scheme, great event. Glad to see that Elisa finally got on towards LAN, because I think they tried to a year ago, I think, and then it fell through because of COVID, or like a year and a bit ago, and it fell through because of COVID. I remember they were talking to me about it, and it never happened. So I'm glad they had. I think the only other thing actually as well, Dweg and Jay had some pretty long days. My God, they did every single playoff game. So bless them, their throats must have been dead after that. And they were doing another tournament like in was it Norway, like missed games or whatever. Like
Jay and Dreg have been like Jay and Dreg did that as you say, that Academy League event in Norway during the major, like actual
during the major.
Men.
Never accepting a gig during the major.
Insane.
Yeah, unless I'm getting paid like, I'm talking like 4 figures a day, there's absolutely no shot I'm turning up for a gig during the major. So credit to them. These guys are actually grafted, to say the least. But I guess, you know, we've kind of alluded to already. We can kind of briefly move on.
Quick, talk shit about Paladin while he's not here.
Talk shit about Paladin. Paladin's gone somewhere. Paladin, he's
in the toilet.
Oh, he's in the toilet. Right, yeah.
I think Paladin's got a tiny bladder. This guy's bladder sucks. Goodness me.
I also need a piss, but I it's more because I drink loads. So I'm one of those people who
you know what?
When I don't speak, I'm always sipping. Like just always got drinks on hand. So
I got a little fridge. Look, can you see it? Wait, I'll try it. There we go.
Oh, mate.
The tiniest little fridge you'll ever see in your life, and all I've got is like water and like a juice in there. That's all I've got.
I need that. But the thing is, I was actually gonna buy exactly that. I was gonna buy a mini fridge, right? Or like, I think even though I'm not sponsored by them, I think the Red Bull mini fridges look quite cool, and they do they do ones that aren't just like Red Bull logos everywhere, which obviously all the sponsor people have, where they're actually like really cool designs and whatnot. But I was thinking about getting one of them and like placing it somewhere behind me, which you lot can't see.
I know.
But I'm in my own apartment now, and my fridge is all of about 6 steps away. So I would just go out this door and into the kitchen next door. So I feel like, it'll be such an expense that I just don't need. And I feel like justifying it to myself is quite difficult. But I think at the same time, it's just a nice thing to have, just be able to lean over. Like,
I know, and it helps. In my case, I have to go downstairs to go to any sort of fridge as well. It just makes me continue to stay hydrated as well, which is just important in general.
Sometimes you get lazy, right? And you're just like, I don't want it downstairs. I don't know what. Anyway.
It makes you pee more, as you say. It makes you fucking pee more. Anyway, we shall move on now. While we wait for Paladin. Do you want to have I've already had my rant about Device. Do you want to just go off about it now?
Yeah, of course.
In North Europe for the first time.
Yeah, I'm happy to start with this. So of course. We had this like kind of interview with Castle, kind of just talking about, he's not coming back. Well, he's not coming in for Blast. And when are we? No, Elisa. Sorry, what am I saying?
Not coming in for Elisa.
Yeah, not coming in for Elisa. But then now he's playing for in Northern Europe CCT. So for those who don't know, CCT is just a tier 2 tournament online.
The invite playoff stage.
Invite playoff stage. So first of all, Astrala's getting an invite. Really shouldn't happen, because I think there's a lot more competitive tier 2 teams. But of course, Elisa was a good performance. So I actually, maybe they're on the up. There's some big players there, but Astralis haven't really been, because their performance has been so bad. Everyone wants to watch them. That's so for CCD, they're just cashing in on a team who aren't really doing too much else. To be perfectly honest, they're in desperate need of games under their belt, because I think this is a problem that teams like OG had, for example. We look towards Melbourne, where for OG, their performances were brutal. I mean, they lost to Wings Up. They got knocked out by Wings Up, which was, I think, probably, aside from Endpoint Na'Vi, was probably the upset of the year. And you look towards, I guess maybe apart from FaZe Gone 03, that probably goes as one of the upsets of the year. But and OG realised that their biggest problem as a roster is not that they weren't talented, not that they didn't need to, they needed to make changes. It was that they just don't play enough games. They kind of, play the fringe tier 1 tournaments and get knocked out by the solid tier 1 team. So they knew that they needed to, essentially the same way you do in football, where in pre-season, Liverpool go and play Scunthorpe United and just spank them 8-0. It's a confidence booster, but it also lets you just kind of, try new things out. And OG realised this by playing in CCT, and I think Astralis are doing the exact same thing, where they've realised that there's no way we can go in, especially with fucking Mister. There's no shot we're going to be able to go in towards, basically a tier 1 tournament and just be, plain old normal Astralis. So,
yeah. Do you want an 11-minute ago breaking news then to contribute to this?
Go on.
4 other teams that are invited to North Europe in that online stage playoffs. So we're going to have, what was it, Astralis, OG, what were the other 2? Do you remember? I've actually forgotten.
I don't, but I remember they weren't as big. They were the big hitters. Yeah.
Okay, so the other four that have been confirmed are Ents, Sprout, Movistar, and Saw. Saw, bit of a joke.
Saw's a bit of a meme, yeah.
Because they're not really that good at the moment, and you would argue that FTW are actually better than them.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair.
Which is pretty crazy, considering the switches that those 2 rosters have had in the last year or so. But yeah, Ent Sprout, that's fair enough, and Movistar, I still want to see them play more with Martinez, so give them one or two more chances. But yeah,
actually pretty stacked.
It's a tough one.
To be fair, relatively stacked playoffs. I gotta say. I mean, credit to CCT for kind of being able to, I guess, properly establish themselves within Tier 2. Like, Elisa did it very comfortably. I mean, having a LAN would do that. We've seen promises of CCT having a LAN, but God knows if we actually will end up seeing it, because they promised that last year and we didn't see anything. So, but who knows, maybe. But, yeah, anyway, about Device, we've got Paladin back as well. But about Device, I think for me, absolute LAN dodger. Like, grow up. Basically,
Paladin's come back to this.
He essentially, in my eyes, I mean, we saw. I think it was Blame F and Zipnex. I'm pretty sure. No, Blame F and Glaive do an interview. I think just before Elisa, or just post major, whatever. Kind of just saying like, oh, why essentially he wasn't playing. And Astralis were the ones who released it. They kind of filmed and released it. I thought it was first of all a very weird interview because it was like, you're talking. The whole interview was talking about Dev1ce and the integration to the team. Why is Dev1ce not there? Like, why isn't he doing the interview? That doesn't make sense. Like, surely he should be the one being like, even if Dev1ce had, come out publicly in with an Astralis filmed interview and be like, I'm just not ready yet. I've been out for like 11 months, lads. Like, just give me a bit of time. But no, he kind of got like his lackeys to do it for him, which was a bit weird because it means that he's not the face of the blame. But I think for me, he just land dodged. I think simple as that. As much as it's a meme to say that, I think obviously they're like, oh, he's not ready. But like, why? This is an active part of being a tier 1 CS:GO player, and I think in a way, being thrown in for the deep end isn't a bad idea. And it's not really even the deep end because it's one event. There's no more at the end of this year. I mean, for them, he needs to get back into the cycle, and it's good to just get, it's not like he's going to go to the major. So it's good to just get something under his belt. As you mentioned, it's like an hour flight as well, if that. So,
yeah.
I feel like he should have gone. And but I think it was multiple things that went into it. I think for Astralis, they knew if Dev1ce goes, it'll be a huge talking point for them, which would obviously be sick. But if Dev1ce underperforms, then the backlash is going to be brutal, right? If he had gone there and dropped an absolute stinker, then, not only would Dev1ce, publicly get absolutely hounded, which, we know how mentally fragile he can be at times. So I feel like that could have been a bit of it basically seemed like it could have been a make or break. And I think they didn't want to risk the make or break there and rather just ease him into the process online. But I feel like it's such an easy way out, a bit of a cop out where, if you want to be a tier 1 player on a contract that he's on, which you can just assume is going to be in the 7 figures, this is an active part of it. And I know he's had problems in the past traveling when he had illnesses, but I think if I'm right in saying he's no longer got them, you've got to be attending these sort of events. So, and they didn't really ever release an actual justification as to why. It was just like, oh, we're just easing him in. But it's like, but why? Like, why are you easing him in? Is he not ready? Are you basically admitting that he actually is shit, and he's been out for 11 months and he's got a massive amount of rust, and it's with the new meta changes and of course the new changes of the AWP as well. Maybe this obviously that was, but the new changes of the AWP post that, but you know what I mean, right? The meta's changed in the last 11 months, and maybe he's just not accomplished. I know everyone likes to just wank him off and say like, oh, he dropped 40 on FPL. Fuck off, no one cares. It's not the same. No one cares if he dropped 40 against Bob Loves Cheese 123, who's level 10 4K elo. Like, no one cares. Like, it's not justification. It's a different level in tier 1.
There are two
level
factors.
10s and tier 1 players is like a level 10 against a silver. It's a different story.
Yeah.
So I hate this stupid argument of like, oh, but he played 40 FPL games this year, so it's okay. Like, he's now ready for the tier 1 stage. No, it's not. Just come out and admit that, he's going to take a lot of scrims to get him ready. Basically, just be fucking honest. But it's Astralis, and of course, that's the lowest thing on their priority list. So it kind of pissed me off, basically. It's like standard Astralis, dodging it, and obviously off the back of the config thing where they just lied. It was like, oh yeah, his ankle. No, he fucking didn't. He sparked someone out and then got sparked out himself. So basically, in my little rant here, Astralis, can you tell the truth for once? I know it's fucking difficult. Don't get me wrong, but Jesus Christ, do us a favour, because you can read you like a book, is what we're saying.
Because there are two factors to this. Because one, I think if Dev1ce actually played Elisa, then Astralis might have actually won the bloody event. Honestly,
I agree.
Christie was clearly a bit of a liability.
He was pretty
at times.
weak.
Only had one really impactful map, really, in the entire one. And I think the second thing is that I was going to bring up before the news came out that he was going to play in CCT. Was the fact that Castle interview that is in our in our little schedule. It's the fact that he says like bless Castle, he's like the interim coach, and maybe he's not in the know as much as some people at the top of the organization, right? So maybe he's saying things like this for this reason because he genuinely doesn't. But for someone to be involved with Astralis and end a sentence like, we have to see when early 2023, I hope. Like, there's no one at the organisation who signed the bloody player know when he's going to play. Like, that was so strange. I mean, thankfully, of course, he is playing CCT. Now, obviously, you'd expect him to stay in the roster from now on. But Paladin's back from the toilet. Let's see what he has to say about it.
So, I heard everything. I heard everything about my tiny bladder. I do have a tiny bladder. I won't even lie. I can't watch movies without having to go to the bathroom at least once.
You used to be
So I
a fiend in the
apologize.
cinema.
Anyways,
Oh.
on the
So
topic
good.
of device, look, all of these teams that you guys announced are, their season is done. Like they will not be at the World Final. And the player break starts at like the end of December. So we're at this kind of crossroads of like, what do we really do now if we're a team, because there are no A-tier tournaments to play in right now. And you would have like tournaments like an Epicenter or like a Star Ladder in the interim right now to kind of close the season out, and they don't have that. So I'm thinking that it's more so that they're all trying to secure one, try to get reps in before the end of the year, because the first tournament back will probably be like late January-ish of Blast groups, and then we'll be straight into Kato. And so it'll be very fast and furious to start out the year. So you want to get as many reps in before you go on a hiatus. So I actually like that all these teams are trying to vie for it. It also creates another exciting tournament. I know it's online, but still, it's cool to see some of these players take to the server again until the before the end of the year. And for Device, it's super low risk because look, it's online. It's against. You could obviously chalk it up to like, oh, it's tier 2 European teams. They're just demons online. They can take over the server. And it just allows for Device to have an excuse to get out of it. And I know that sounds really like kind of cope, I guess, but it's just it's super low risk for Device to get flack, because he's going to get flack either way. And instead of being thrown into the deep end of bombing out of a land that Astralis could potentially win outright with him in the server, instead you just bomb. I mean, how many situations have you seen invited teams in CCT just absolutely bomb out and go to a land immediately after?
Comes to mind.
I cast that game, one of the best games I've ever casted. It was
you could pick out so many different iterations of various matches where things like that happen. So I think it's awesome. And the other thing is that you can potentially just secure a land spot off of winning this tournament alone. So you have a situation where all the tournaments next year is mainly ESL Blast, right? So if you have one of those LAN finals in between, you qualify for that big 2024 LAN as well. There's just a myriad of opportunities, and it's very low risk. So why not just debut here? Overall, I think that this is a good decision from Astralis, and it isn't a brand risk for Device to get shit on online.
No, I agree. Well, just briefly, as much as we hounded Paladin, I also need a piss. So Trav, I mean, I've kind of already heard your points as well. So
yeah, we'll move on. I'll move it on.
Yeah,
we've got plenty to get through. So go have your pee, and I'll move it on.
Right.
A bit.
We can move on to, of course, the changes. I think is that next in line for us.
Yes, we'll go with AWP M4 Anubis. Yeah, so we'll start off with that.
A new map, Hubis, made me want to kill myself, by the way. But carrying on.
That tweet rollout was just some of the worst that I've ever seen.
Right, Trav, take it away. I'll be back in 2 minutes.
I will. Welcome to the 2.5 Talent podcast, which is now hosted by Dev1ce's, PogChamp. Who needs that Neokai kid? Me and Paladin have all the knowledge that we need in this one. He's got his headset off. He means he can't hear us like Paladin can hear us talk about his tiny bladder. Haha. Anubis M4 AWP change. Firstly, my thoughts. 1. Anubis. I think it's a really nice idea for Valve to get another map in the pool. And a fresh community map as well. They've bought the rights from the original maker of Anubis, so now it's under Valve's control. And once they organise some of the clippings and stuff like that, where nades can get caught, I think it's going to be very good. And already getting some pretty positive early feedback from some IGLs and professionals in the scene. Good to see. And Dust 2 being removed, PogChamp. Mirage gets to stay. Some people might hate that, but I think it's all right. M4 change, I think it's currently the closest it's ever been between the two, just from early sort of signs between the two. I'm seeing the M4A4 have range. I'm seeing the M4A4 have fire rate. The A1S is now pretty good at really actually close range rather than long range, which is kind of surprising. And I'm actually seeing quite a few M4A4s now, and the A1S does look weaker in some duels. You can actually see it with your own eyes, that it takes the extra bullet to kill in certain situations. And finally, the AWP change, 5 bullets instead. I think that's a good change, because now it means AWPers can't make mistakes. Even in that Asia ECL match I did earlier today, there was an instance where I think it was News from Renewal had to hit all 5 shots. He was getting rushed down by pistols, and I think he actually did hit all 5 with all 5 bullets in the clip. And muscle memory to not reface when you've shot your 5 bullets. I've already seen that mistake being made by Sparrow on 9 in that Falcons game. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. And I'll give it up the floor to Paladin to go through those 3 that I just did.
Anubis is fantastic. I have been playtesting it for quite a bit, and I easily like it more than Vertigo and Ancient. It's insane to me that there are so many pundits out there that are saying this is the worst map pool that we've ever had in CS. When Tuscan was a competitive map in the map pool, grow up. There was a mill. Grow up. I'm not gonna name names, but I hate it. I hate it so much. I don't understand why people can't just embrace change. CS fans have been criminally bad at this, and I won't lie, I was probably in that camp starting with Vertigo, but as soon as Ancient came into the pool, I was kind of like, look, we got to give this a chance. We got to band together and make some common call outs. It's always a fun experience to learn how to apply old tactics and old ideas to new battlefields, and that's ripped straight away from Sponge. I already know this, but I thought that the point that he made on that was absolutely picture perfect. And Anubis is a map that is vastly different from a lot of the maps that are in the pool. Obviously, aesthetic is very similar to some of the dusty maps that we have. But at the same time, I'm so very excited to have a pool like that. Oh, also a community-made map. It's been a while. I think Cash was like the only one, right? Like as far as that I can remember. And that's always super exciting because it brings more motivation to map makers, because that's an entire side of the community that isn't really talked about as much. So that's always super exciting. Clipping issues, I completely agree with Trav. It is a big problem.
Yeah.
How many times on B main that I can't bank a flash off of the sides of the walls and it just hits me square in the face. I hate that. Obviously it'll be fixed, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But
I think it's quite easy to fix as well, from my understanding.
Yeah, so. No, it is. It is. But I'd like to have it sooner rather than later. I hope we don't try to sidebar it like we did with a bunch of the Ancient changes. So I hope that all of these kind of take shape as soon as possible and that we head into blast groups no problem. And obviously, screw Dust 2. I hate the map. It is too stale. Great that it's out of the pool. And I like that we have enough differences in the map pool right now in heading into the World Finals. M4 changes are cool. I like it. It's. I don't think it is enough yet. Obviously, I still want to see what it actually does to the pro scene, because right now in like matchmaking and stuff like that, I can definitely see that there is a change. I've switched over to the A4 myself, and I like that you have to kind of make a conscious decision now based off of how you play the game. That is one of the things that I always loved in the game, where people had to make a conscious decision before they go into the game that I want to play with the A4 or I want to play with the A1S, and you're stuck with that decision for the rest of the game. And overall, CS has always been a game like that. You take a risk in the game, you die 10 seconds in the round, you have to sit and watch. You don't respawn. You have to sit and watch and think about the decisions that you made and how you go about the next round. Same situation, A4, A1S. You have to make that decision beforehand, and I like that. And overall, the A4 and A1S should force players to make that. And if it can make it all the way to the pro scene, where anchors have to make that decision of I need the extra 10 bullets and I want to kind of anchor overall and my position will be known, but I'm trying to play for the 2 kills before I go down. Or you have like those rotator positions that play the A1S and they play outside, they spam smokes, they dodge in and out, they deal a little bit of damage here or there and make it easier for the A4s. I like that concept, and hopefully this nerf can do that. And overall, the op change is also super awesome. It makes clips like Trav was saying, with like the 5 bullets in the chamber all being landed. It makes them more impressive. Like aces now are way more impressive because you can't miss. I had the same situation with ECL Wiz on EG Black pulling off an eco ace
lately.
and yeah, he's been on a tear, mind you. I don't know if you guys are NA fans, go watch back some of the EG Black games because he's been on one. And I think that even in eco situations, AWP players getting an ace is always super impressive now because you're just 100% accuracy. So, and it also pulls back the idea that AWP players cannot spam endlessly down wallbang situations without being punished. And also, it forces just AWP players to play a little bit more conservatively and really take their decisions into account before they make a rash decision. So
Yeah,
all
yeah.
of these changes, I'm very happy with. I'm very curious to see whether or not it has enough of an impact on the pro scene, and that's why the World Final will be very exciting, just in that
It
in and
will.
of itself. And so yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to the map thing, I think for me, obviously, whenever there's any changes to the map pool, everybody instantly is up in arms. It's never positive, even though for the grand scheme, the changes are very positive. I mean, I pray day and night that Dust 2 would get out of the map pool, and I'm an atheist, so I was really good. I was really clutching at straws here to make this one work, and thank God, Gaben, whatever it is, that absolute hot steaming pile of ass is out of the pool.
Absolutely the right call.
So bad. I mean, as well, first of all, people who were saying get rid of Mirage, A, grow up, B, fuck off. Like, such a dumb decision. Mirage is literally a perfect map in terms of anybody from a pro to a new player knows how to play. It's so simple, and that's what makes it good. As well, I think a lot of people always forget that CS is not just for professional Counter-Strike. It's not just for you sweating out 8 pugs a day on FACEIT. It's for people to play for fun and for people to
Also, play a different map. If you're pugging Mirage every day, go learn a different map.
On
There's 6
FACEIT,
other
you
maps
can
in the
pick
pool.
which
Come on
maps.
now.
You can literally change what maps you
Why
want to play.
why do we all ban out everything other than Mirage? And they're like, oh my god, we're on Mirage, guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness.
You can literally
you
drop
can,
down
you can
top
play
right.
the other maps.
Exactly.
Oh my god.
You can take it out of your queue so you literally, it's not even in the veto process on FACEIT. So, I mean, just first of all, my boggling to me, if you play MM, the same thing. You don't have to queue it. So, if you're complaining, stop playing it every pug, because you can literally take it out of the queue. I think you have to have face premium for that. But if you're complaining this much, I don't think you're gonna mind the $3.99 or however fucking much it is. So grow up. But no, maps are not just for pros and for you guys who sweat out pugs all day. They're meant to be, incorporated for, you got to realize that we have, on average, 1 million concurrent players most evenings, right? When both NA and EU are awake. So there's a lot of people. Not all of us, are pros or whatever. So it's the perfect middle ground map. You kind of need one of those. And Dust 2 had definitely not been that way for a long time. I mean, it being such a toxic map and so boring to watch and so boring to play. But I think Anubis, well, I don't think it's brilliant as a map. I just think it's all right. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think you need all right maps. Not every map can be this fantastic, absolute masterpiece perfection. I think it's decent. I think it's a little bit different. People were quick to be like, oh, Valorant map again, grow up. Just because it looks different and it's not exactly just 2 lanes and that's it, doesn't mean it's a Valorant map. It's nice having a bit of variety because it forces you to actually, improve your skill setting. As players, you should be thankful that there's a change because, if you're hard stuck 2k elo and FACEIT, maybe it's because you're shit at the normal maps, which have, 2-3 lanes, but maybe a slightly different Mark Anubis might play into your playstyle a little bit better. So you should actually be very thankful. And for pros as well, it's a great opportunity for teams to come through and, be the first. I always remember when Ancient came into the pool. Copenhagen Flames, one of the best teams in the world in Ancient. In the first month and a half, they had 29 times played with a 92% win rate. They only had 2 losses. They were unbelievable, and that actually forced them to end up, and this was post Stockholm, right, and saying, and they ended up making pretty decent runs in some deep tournaments when they were only regarded as a tier 2 team. But I think the most important thing that you alluded to, Paladin, it's a community map. Now, I actually know someone who helped make Anubis, and I'll shout him out. He didn't help make. I think he was one of the guys who would, every time they make a change, he would say, yeah, this is good, this will work, this won't work. A guy called Quoting made a lot of wingman maps. I went to university with him. Very weird, small world. Lovely, lovely dude. And I play 10 stacks with him quite often. Lovely guy. Quoting was telling me as well that, so the way it works, obviously, you can't be so it's a community map, but it's Valve owned now. So Valve have bought the rights to the map. So those guys no longer are in charge because essentially there's multiple reasons, but Valve want to be able to make quick changes if they need to, very quick changes. And if it's a community map, it has to go through the community mapper first, and it's a long old process. And also, there's a world in which a community mapper could just draw a massive penis on the floor, and there's nothing Valve could do basically, unless they'd have to backdoor entry it. So and granted, I don't think any community mappers are going to be against their map being given over the rights, because I heard how much they get paid. I got given a loose, figuratively term, and god damn it, they'll be absolutely happy with that. So they're not worried at all. But yeah, I think it really sets a good precedent that we can now have more community maps. 'Cause I saw FM Pone, and we even kind of mentioned this actually a couple of podcasts ago, talking about FM Pone, and he was saying that, oh, it's never going to happen. You know, I was the only one. I don't think it's ever going to happen again because, you know, Valve won't have complete control. Well, this is proof that they don't. Like, I mean, obviously they have control of the map itself, but they are open to bringing in new maps, which means that there's worlds in which other maps that a community made come into the pool, and it sparks innovation, and it sparks people to be inventive, and it sparks people to, you know, put the time and effort into making a map and trying to, you know, potentially get your map in a competitive game. And I mean, for these guys who have grafted, I mean, Anubis has been out for years, but like for these guys who have grafted to make this map, and it's pretty stunning. Of course, I know it's dusty and pretty yellow for the most part, but you know, it's a stunning map in terms of the effort they've put in, and you know the time and the day where that's in, you know, a major final or a blast final and stuff, it's got to bring a tear to your eye, right? So they know hard work's paid off.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, Ancient reached that stage. I know that was Valve made originally, but like Ancient reached that stage for a while, and it actually provided some bangers, right? I've got sort of 3 final thoughts on the map changes. One, although I love Vertigo as a pug map, I do agree it's hated by most of the pros for a good reason. It's not the best, unfortunately, and it does. I think it's increased, but I understand why people and lots of viewers and people in the scene wanted out as well. 2, Nico tweeted the other day something along the lines of, "Oh, why Anubis? Why not Tuscan? Like,
fuck Tuscan. Oh my god,
mate, mate, please. 1, Tuscan isn't ready. 2, the reason G2 is shit is because of these sort of things. Put the bloody effort in. Concentrate on the map, and maybe you'll make it your own map, and you'll be the best in the world on it, and you'll have a chance to fight for tournaments again."
Tuscan sucks, by the way. Like,
people who can play, professionals who can play without fucking trying the map. Like, I swear to God, shut the fuck up. Anyway, 3, I think the final one was, I got the chance to cast the very first HLTV game. It was an open IP Cash Cup game. I got the chance to do it. It was 80k versus MIBR, and already 80k had some nice executes, some spawn smokes. MIBR had a nice retake on the A-bomb site, I think it is, where they bounced some incendiaries off the sort of arch on the roof of the site to get onto like the little circular actual bomb site itself, like the cheese, which was one of my chat christened it, little cheese-shaped block in the middle. And that was just interesting to see that. Apparently, also came out, Henny tweeted along the lines of he'd literally never played it once, even going into that game.
Fair.
So you know, he got 20 kills. So you know what? Fair play to him. He did okay considering that, and MIBR did okay considering that. But 80k won it, and that was pretty cool to experience that, to be a little bit of part of a mini part of history.
Yeah, so, just one other thing I want to add about the changes, and I know you guys already mentioned it, but I actually really like the M4 changes more, just because it will make, I think more than players specifically will be conscious about, you know, what decision they go in. I think it's going to be super role specific, which I really like. I think that in itself is already a really cool variation, and especially with how things were at the moment, where it was very CT sided. I mean, more than it's kind of ever been in a way. I like now that this change will force conscious decisions, which also at the same time can force really good plays, but also, you know, mistakes, right? And as Paladin said, you got to sit there for, you know, 1 minute 30 when you die instantly. So I'm a big fan. I think it's quite cool. But we'll have to wait and see in a more pro sense, because we haven't really seen anything too much about it yet. But we can move on. Of course, we've had another pretty big tournament on the horizon. Blast has just finished the Blast 4 finals. Heroic ended up taking FaZe down in the finals, which was, I gotta say, actually, you know, credit to Heroic of keeping up consistencies. Back-to-back finals is actually, you know, pretty implorable. As much as I don't like them, and I've always been open about not liking Heroic, it's pretty implorable to see them go back-to-back finals, so credit to them. Well, FaZe, obviously, it's better than the major, but you still say that. I think FaZe themselves will say, if it's not a win, we're disappointed. And I think a lot of viewers will probably say the same thing. If it's not a win, disappointed. And, you know, I think it's case in point that it wasn't even maybe a hiccup that the major was, you know, bad. Maybe there's actually some more longer term problems starting to arise here with FaZe. It's looking a little bit on the slightly dicier side, where you could definitely see, you know, specific rounds and specific even maps to be said, where it wasn't comfortable from them, which is they're usually just the most dominant side, right? And it wasn't comfortable. So yeah.
In my view, when it comes to the full final, I just have to give props, full stop. FaZe to bounce back pretty immediately, and I think now that sort of confirms to me they made the final. In fact, they did, even though they lost in a very close fashion. They find a way to win games with their B and C game, which I think is particularly impressive. Only their biggest slip up this year was really like Cloud9 a couple of times in Pro League in Dallas, and then the B&E game. It's really 3 matches in the entire year, which you could say are a big slip up. I think they've got to give props to them. I think without a doubt they're the best team. They're the team of the year when it comes to Counter-Strike. Props to Heroic. I agree with Nea. I think it's very hard to dislike. Sorry, very easy to dislike this Heroic team, and I've never really sort of felt any warmth toward them at all. But as with Jame at the major, and of course we all thought he was a bit of a boring guy. Well, he's obviously not. We know what Cadian's like. He panders to the crowd, panders to people in a specific way to get people on his side sometimes. But I've got to say, his and Stown as well. Stown's interview post-win was amazing. Post-trophy lift, it was really from the heart and honest. But Cadian's, the interview on the stage where his mum comes up and hugs him, that is just like pure sporting emotion. That was not put on for a camera. That was just his mum just walking past, seeing him and going in for the hug, and how beautiful that was. I mean, everyone, no matter what past Cadian might have had, whether it's been his own personal bad luck, whether it's been the stuff with old teammates, you know who I'm on about, it doesn't matter. That was a pure moment. That was beautiful. Yeah. And everyone's human at the end of the day, and I really those sort of things, like with Dupree. I think in one of the events years ago for Astralis, I think it was after his dad passed away or something, and he was like tearful on the stage. Like I never really
go on
liked
to win that tournament, by the way.
Yeah. They won the tournament. Like it's stuff like that where you may hate them because they're good sometimes, or hate them for some past misgiving, but small moments where you see the true person on stage in a big final, like with Stan and Cadian at the full final. That endeared them to me at least another 10% more than they had before, So props to them. And to bounce back after losing a major final, convincingly losing a major final as well, just impressive.
And on home turf as well. I think it makes it just that touch bit better for them, because they've got close before, right? And it's always been a thing of like, they were, kind of close but no cigar. So now they've got it under their belt. Maybe even, I'm not by any way going to say this is the start of an era, but maybe it's the start of Heroic being more competitive for trophies, because that was always the thing of Heroic. It was like they were great, but they could never really see it off the trophies. Get the cabinet, pretty decked out. Now potentially we could see these guys where be actually competitive in terms of kind of a top 4, top 5 nature on a more regular basis, and at least where the circuit is really unstable right now, they could essentially adapt to that and take it into their own. And hopefully we get to see some more of that, because they do play some really good Counter-Strike. It's an enjoyable watch, and it's also good to see things like people like Yabi, who I've followed since his early part of his career when he was just joining Copenhagen Flames and whatnot, and him now finding consecutive form where he was very inconsistent, and he would even have some real stinkers, and now he's looking a little bit more consistent. So yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of positives. Also, I want to mention as well, how stunning was it as well? I mean, Blast, Jesus Christ, they can run an event, and they can run an event damn well, because
Royal Arena was insane.
Royal Arena, I mean, it's always good, but Blast just keep outdoing themselves, and which is why we were kind of saying earlier that Blast very easily could have the best major ever going in towards Paris, just because they never miss. They literally never miss. And just another side note as well, I think that show match was probably one of the best show matches I think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I think
that's what you need to do with show matches.
They're not meant to be serious. They're meant to be fun. Yeah. And I think it was brilliant. And it was innovative as well, which is, as we were saying earlier, innovation forces the others to step their shit up. Because, I'm sorry, like PGL, no one wants to see 4 of Copenhagen Flames and whoever's left versus whoever, I can't even remember who they played because it was so bad. I mean, Antwerp, and then, that was a Stockholm even. I was there for that. I remember being like, watching the game and being like, Jesus, this is boring. Like, I think at half time I went and got a beer and just fucked off, because it was just like, no one cared. It was empty in there as well. Because PGL, they for those who don't know, with that Copenhagen Flames thing, they literally asked them like the day before. They had no plans for a show match, which I think, I mean, that says everything. But they're meant to be fun. It's not meant to be just people sweating out. And that's what it was in that one. Antwerp was the same as well. It was just people sweating out. I mean, of course, the major one was actually kind of nice in terms of the storyline behind it, but it still was serious. Was okay. I still would have liked,
and it was train too. I like the fact that they put it on train.
It was the whole thing was nostalgia, so you didn't really mind having kind of old Nip versus old SK or whatever they're called, way back when. You know what I'm saying? But like, I think for me, Blast has set a precedent where that's how show matches should be. And you can see as well, the general public response was so positive off the back of it because it was funny. It was fucking hilarious. Like, the smoked out one, I think, was just brilliant. It's so dumb, but it's like so good. Like the zero gravity one, like all of the little tidbits were great. And I think the casting wise alongside it was very funny as well because they knew it was very relaxed so they could kind of crack some bants. And it allows for, as we've said, our commentators who we have in Tier 1 who are funny people. They're generally funny, but they very rarely get to let their hair down. Of course, not Anders literally speaking, but they get to kind of let their hair down and have a bit of fun with it, and they did, and it was just nice to see. So I'm hoping that is what is the present. I'm hoping, of course, at Paris I've done a fantastic show match and they step it up once further, make it even better. This time, on what is the biggest tournament in the world. So
the only thing that would be worrying is that this would be like one of those first tournaments where they have a ton of teams that they have to take care of now. True. It's previously like 12 teams max. And it'll be like 32, maybe even like 64 when you think about the RMR. And the amount of regions that they'd have to take care of. So I'm hoping that they have a plan for it because if memory serves me correct, the ESL calendar is stacked this year. This coming year. And there's going to be very small gaps. And so I'm very curious to see what their game plan is as to how they're going to carry out the RMRs and the event itself. But if I know Blast, I know that they'd probably already have this idea in place. They know that they have to play around a very packed schedule. They've done it before. But if there's any, like if I had to ever play devil's advocate of what could go wrong, it's just that they have so many teams to deal with. But beyond that, production-wise, there should be no issues by any means. Like they've put on just continuously great events, and they've figured out the kind of secret sauce as to what they're looking for in bringing out hype from the audience and the viewer alike. And I think that's really hard to find that balance because you can definitely see everybody in the arena is definitely enjoying it with the walk-ins and whatnot.
Exactly.
And the pre-match banter or whatever.
Or like Bentner coming up on the stage, Lord Bentner. They played into that, like the whole Lord
It's amazing. Thing. It's amazing.
I remember when we lost in 6 people versus 5. I don't think that ever happened on stage before. Off my memory, I couldn't think of anything. Just small things, right? But I think what you're kind of alluding to, or what just to add on to that, is like they've now they've confirmed, solidified 100% they take number one when it comes towards production. I think there was a debate of who's better in terms of production, and I think it was personal preference, and I don't think it's even personal preference now. I don't think you can even say that ESL have better production just because Blast continue to keep blowing it in themselves out the water.
What I will say is Blast have sort of, I think it was noticeable in the full final. They slowed it down a little bit. Like it wasn't as brilliant as it had been in some of their bigger events because I think they're sort of saving up and ramping up for that major cycle. So I think it wasn't as amazing as it could have been. And of course, obviously, if you compare it to Rio had a lot of the sort of Made of Madness, whatever it was. Those segments were absolutely brilliant. But I agree that. Even though Rio was superb by ESL standards, Blast continued to push the envelope. But I think we've actually got quite a lot to get through and not really that much time. Neo. So, Paladin, do you have any extra thoughts on the World Final? Anything you want to
add? Excited to see Anubis debut, and I think OG should pick it whatever series they play.
Hell yeah.
That's about it.
So do you want to go on to the main man Nipple now? And see what we think about this?
I mean, I don't know if any of you saw the very cool picture of like him in a chair. Watching the team, I think that was a very cool one. I've got it up now, but it did the rounds on Twitter for a bit. But of course, Blade has confirmed that Nipple will play some of the maps at the World Finals in Abu Dhabi. It's interesting, right? I think obviously everybody knows there's something up at Na'Vi. It's not working. Sunday Young always takes kind of the brunt of it, but I think I don't mean this in a mean way. Deservedly in some cases. I mean, I don't think he's not the right fit. He's not the right player. Hasn't been performing as well. He was only a temporary solution to what is a long-term problem. And of course, I think now his term is up. I think now there's definitely changes that need to be made. He will be playing some maps alongside Sunday Young. So it'll be map specific. And that's something that works in this case. It's not allowed in the major, but it's allowed in every other event that's not Valve run, essentially. But yeah, I think, Nipple, I think he's the breast of the academy. No, but he's one of the best players coming out of their academy side. He's I think he's all right, but I think he's 17 years old. He's really unproven. I mean, I've been kind of drafting up a video talking about Sunday Young potential replacements. And my kind of bit that I was talking about, which whenever I release the video, I'll talk about with Nipple, was that. So he's 17 years old. He's never played a notable LAN, and his best opportunity to play a notable LAN would have been the We Play Academy finals, because they finished third this season. But of course, with the political situation going on in Ukraine, they're not having any finals there. Fair enough. So all played online. But even still, he's not a standout player in the We Play Academy League. I mean, he only finished the season with like a 1.07 rating, which is the best on Na'Vi Academy. And I know they finished third, but, you know, it's not amazing, because when you compare to some of the other big talents that have come through the Academy League, bear in mind, you know, Academy League CS is like tier 3, tier 4 level. Like, you know, those guys, aside from if you were Miles and XT, just get stomped anytime they step into a tier 2 tournament, right?
Thing is,
so you look towards... Go on.
Na'Vi don't need to go for, like, you mentioned rating. I was going to Tempe before you carry on a little bit.
Yeah.
Na'Vi, if they're looking to replace Sunday Young, they're not looking for another world star like Bit. They're looking for someone who could do a job in a role like Sunday Young is trying to do, just slightly better.
Yeah, but the only thing for me that is the problem is that Nipple doesn't play those roles, so he has to learn some new roles. Especially on T side, he doesn't play those roles, especially. So he has to play completely different roles when it comes towards that. And when you look towards the previous successes, I mean, the Academy League has a history of very good players who stepped up into towards tier 1, and it's been an absolute unbelievable achievement, and it's been a great decision. All the Miles and XT trio, they've all come out and been pretty fantastic. I mean, to finish the way they did at the major is proof in the pudding. Manesi coming through the Academy team, of course, but he was fantastic and has been fantastic. Bit, another great example, right? These guys have come through the Academy team. The only thing is, though, when those guys played in the Academy scene, everyone was like, oh my fucking god, these guys are just so much better than everybody else. No one was saying that about Nipple. Everyone was saying that about players like Fessa, who was untouchable. Some of the Spirit Academy guys who continued to get really close. Pepsa, for example, another one from Fnatic Rising. Volt as well, another guy from Fnatic Rising, who I know the likes of Launders and Scrawny were very vocal about as a rifler who's been unbelievable. No one mentioned Nipple. This is why it's kind of like, in a way, it's a bit of a shock factor. And I know that
for sure.
There's many other reasons in it, in terms of, they know they're in a rebuild. I mean, Blade even in the interview says we're in a rebuild period. We know we are. So, you know, this is it's trial and error. And they've got Sunday Young doing some maps, Nipple doing others, and it's about him getting experience. It's, in my eyes, I don't see any world in which there's a long-term solution, because it can't be. I don't personally think Nipple is even good enough, to be perfectly honest. And we've seen the other caveat of Academy players going up in towards tier 1 and then not being good enough. Mister's the first one that comes to my name. I'd still, as much as he was, you know, they did well at Elisa, he isn't good enough. Like, he's not yet tier 1 level, and he won't be. And I don't think lumping him into Academy games is just gonna into tier 1 games, is gonna immediately make him good enough. I think what you need to do as a player is follow the path of Shuhei, who was okay in the Academy League, but he wasn't stand out in terms of course, he's an IGL. He's never going to have the stats to be stand out. But what they've realized is by him going to like a tier 2 team and playing within regular international CSGO and coming against a variety of players, a variety of play styles, a variety of tempos, whatever, that's what makes you a good player. Not just going from Astrology's Academy system to the main system, tier 1 system, which is very similar. Same thing here with Nipple. I think, you know, if he struggles at times, and if you look at map ratings as well of him across the last 3 months, it's not great. And, you know, they're getting beaten by teams that they shouldn't be, and, you know, very inconsistent performances. I think, yeah, it's nice to see Na'Vi trying to continue to... I mean, obviously, the Academy process, I think, is a really good thing. Bit is proof in the pudding that it's a good thing, because he came through and was fantastic. Manesi, another great example of who's come through their Academy. But for me, Nipple doesn't feel like the right person. I feel like this could be quite rough in terms of where he's just like a stone in water and completely out of his depth. I know, obviously, it's a bit of a rant here, but I've done a fairly decent amount of research on it over the last few days. And I think there's better options, but at the same time, I know there's better options. It's just, obviously, it's not an immediate decision. These options are coming towards 2023, which is where everybody is talking about the likes of Hobbit. And I think that Hobbit is the perfect person to come in towards this roster, because he's played similar roles before. He's proven at tier 1. He's consistent. He's always level-headed. And, of course, probably one of the most important things, but as we mentioned, he's not Russian. So it's not going to be an issue in terms of, you know, they're not going to pay the Russian government essentially tax to then wage war on their own country. So, you know, that is the reason why they won't sign Russians. I know, you know, I spoke about it in my video, and I know Bubsky did a tweet about it. I think Forrester is actually a really good example of someone who would be really good in this role, because Forrester plays the exact same role as Sunday Young on both T and CT side, and better, and against similar level of opposition when he was playing for Entropic. Of course, we haven't seen him play for Entropic for a while now since they've been dropped, but he's Russian, so it's always going to make things way, way tougher. But that's my multiple sense there, because I think, you know, it's nice to see Academy guys coming through. I don't think he's ready, and I think this could be a really rough showing, but at the same time, they could see something that we don't. But I'm just looking about what I've seen of casting a lot of the Academy League and casting Nipple already, and being pretty, I mean, he was forgettable is the best way to
honestly,
put it. I cast him 4 times and I forgot that he was a player, so that's the way I put
honestly, if Simple likes him and isn't consistently frustrated with SDY, I think it improves the team dynamic and harmony immediately, because you don't want your star player going like this to your teammate, do you? So,
yeah,
that was pretty wild. But anyway, I'll let Paladin cut in with this before I have, I think, 2 points about Falcons and Titans to talk about, and then we can move on.
Yeah, I think overall it's not the right move for Navi. I don't think that the issue right now for Navi is to go younger. I think they should be going like older, if anything.
I agree.
Because right now you need an absolute rock in terms of team environment, and you need a rock in terms of role playing as well. I know, Travis, you're saying that they should be necessarily more firepower on this team, and I completely agree. I don't think there necessarily needs to. I mean, it would be nice to have a 5% more from Bit or 5% more from Simple, but I think that's more so just because of the situation at hand right now, where they're going through this rebuilding phase. You'd probably end up getting that 5% back when you get that settled 5-man lineup. But the issue here is that I don't think that I think it's a very different case from the Bit to Flamey thing and a NPL to STY situation, because Flamey was not necessarily up to snuff, and he was put into certain roles where he was expected to perform, he was expected to output numbers, and he wasn't able to output those said numbers. Very similar situation to like the likes of Edward in previous Navi iterations as well, where these upgrades are purely firepower. They need to be pure firepower because there just simply isn't enough to go around and actually compete for titles. And Nibble has not necessarily showcased that he is necessarily a Monacy in his own right. He's had matches where he can be, and that's awesome. But again, I don't think that it's necessarily the most consistent, and it's against online cups against weaker academy opposition, and that's not boding well in terms of jumping into tier 1. Also, never played a LAN before, and that is a very, very scary prospect. I know in the CIS region, these guys are built like emotionless zombies sometimes, because sometimes they just go in, frag up a storm, and they leave the server, and they're like, yep, I just did my job. I'm like, bro, you're still in high school. Like, you're going to university like next year. Like, how do you not have any like emotion whatsoever? But beyond that, like, still it is always going to be a risk to put on a youngster, especially in some cases like this. I mean, obviously to Navi, it's not a big deal because you can test however you want. You can go about the same situation that you would Bit, where you made it map specific, and you kind of go in with the expectation that you're not going to win the tournament, and that's fine, I guess. But overall, I think that I think you're spot on, Neo. You need a player like Hobbit, who has done his paces in the international scene. He is definitely a rock in terms of roles. He's definitely a rock in terms of positive encouragement. I don't think he's necessarily a person that would get dogged on by Simple. He's just generally a very wholesome guy.
I don't think you get phased if he did as well. I feel like Hobbit's so mentally strong as well that, like,
no, not at all.
If Simple was like, "Oh, you fucking dick," he'd be like, "Cheers." Like, I don't think he'd care. Like, where Nipple will cry on stage if Simple roasts him. So,
and that's the thing. Like, I just think that chemistry wise, that I think that's the biggest thing. I don't think that it'll fit. And right now, I don't think the issue with Navi is necessarily firepower. I think it is environment. And clearly that Simple SDY conundrum during the fall finals has shed a clear light in that department. So I think that as far as chemistry is concerned, this is going to be a huge issue.
There were some quotes as well. Like, I have my to scroll up
Oh,
a little
that's
bit 'cause I
translated, right?
Just
Yeah.
remembered some of the quotes. I'm just see if I can quickly find it. Go ahead, Paladin. Continue. I'm just see if I can.
I mean,
No,
find
no,
it.
I think you're right. That was the
To add
other
to
thing.
that, though,
It wasn't just the video.
we've seen Nipple what he can
Okay,
do
yeah.
in terms of experience just quickly in a more tier 2 environment, because Navi Junior played in the CCT, right? So they had a go and they finished absolutely rock bottom, didn't win a single game. They lost to Copenhagen Flames, which is absolutely fair enough. And I'm going to get onto Copenhagen Flames a little bit later. Absolutely fair enough. And he actually had some all right performances there to give him the credit. And then they got destroyed by Need Doctor, right? Like 2-0. And they're just some Bulgarian mix. You know, I think when this guy struggles against, you know, tier 2 to 3 teams like Need Doctor, of course, I class Copenhagen Flames as a secure tier 2 side. But, you know, that already gets me worried. I think also for me, what I've seen from Nipple, and I've done a bit of demo reviewing, I had a little look at him as an individual from the Academy League, where he had okay performances, but again, like I said, he wasn't memorable. But I think his stats were in the grand scheme, he was in like a 1.2 rating. They're all okay, but it wasn't like standout phenomenal. He's map specific as well. He struggles really bad consistently on some maps, and then is pretty good consistently on other maps. So I think that could end up being a real issue for him, and a thorn in the side of, you know, his maps that he's good at don't line up with the main team, and alongside, as you mentioned, the personality, right? We don't know what this guy's like as a person. We've never seen him like actually play on LAN. Where's he even going to sit? Is he just going to take Sunday Young's place in terms of that PC? So he's going to be right next to Simple, which, as good as it is in terms of a learning experience, it's also terrible in terms of the pressure. I mean, any player in the world sitting next to the GOAT would feel pressure in some way. Like, even if it is a Hobbit, right, he's still feeling in some way a little bit of pressure. Like, okay, I'm sitting next to the best player in the world. You know, let me make sure I'm on my game, because if I'm not, he will just look at me, like, next to me. So, you know, I think personality is the biggest thing, and they need someone who's a rock, as you put exactly rightly, Baladin. And, you know, I mean, I guess as well, Blade has already said that this is super temporary. Like, there's no way in my mind that this is by any means a long-term solution to what is, you know, a long-term problem. They have to bring in someone experienced. It doesn't really matter about firepower, which, I mean, even still, Hobbit's great because his firepower is also great. But yeah, anyway, Trav, you have some quotes.
Yeah, just the ones that I had saved were, obviously I'm just relying on this person that has translated it to that it's true, but I believe it's a reliable source. Simple to SDY, you know, blah blah blah. Translation: it was an Inferno match against Liquid. Translation: fucking shit. It's impossible to play with you. Then a situation on Mirage where there's a situation in Mirage where I think it's the same BO3, if I'm not mistaken, and Simple says Suka, we know what that means. He said, translation, Bliat, what the fuck are you doing? So, you know, there's a couple of scenarios there where clearly, like, SDY, just his play style in general and what he does is just not to Simple's liking, unfortunately.
I reckon there's a world in which SDY comes out of this, and when he's like, you know, finally out of the contract, maybe when he gets towards a new team and he's comfortable and he's happy again, and he just comes out
playing
and just,
with Simple was a nightmare.
Yeah, and then just comes out.
Yeah,
I'd fucking love that, because obviously, no one's going to deny Simple is a prick, right? But I mean, sometimes you have to be a prick to be the best. Ronaldo, cracking example. What a cunt. But you have to be that sometimes, because, you know, being egotistical and being, you know, the best requires you to be selfish in some ways. But I would love to see SDY come out in like a year's time when he's playing for like Bait or someone like that. And, you know, he's coming out and he's saying, yeah, Simple was just an absolute nightmare, a horrible person. Like, I hate him kind of thing. Because obviously we know this definitely. They're not friends. That's probably the best way to put it. So who knows? But if we're,
go
on.
Yeah, I'm done with this. I've got two teams that I just want to have a quick conversation about. Just briefly, because we've got a lot to get through before, in like 1 hour. So
hit us.
I want to say a quick line about Kenny on Falcons. I think it's a move that everyone liked. And it's a great move, especially for the team that he's in with MBK and the like. But the start has been a bit worrying. I've got the opportunity to cast their game against 9. And they in general look very lost. I think Masuta doesn't look comfortable in his roles. I think the communication seems a bit off as well. And since they've added Kenny, they won a 2-0 in a derby against LDLC.
Yeah.
Since then, 0-2 versus Copenhagen Flames. You're going to talk about them, Neo. 0-2 versus 9. 0-2 versus Eclot. 0-2 versus Anonymo. 0-2 versus Ecstatic, despite a 48 kill game from Kenny on map 2. So he's playing well, but things aren't gelling right now, and I'm worried about how long that's going to last. But at least it's a fun move for the scene anyway. And the final thing I want to mention in tier 2 for now, before you go on to Copenhagen Flames, is Oscar returning to Sinners and Forsey going out. Firstly, I think it's a bit rough on Forsey because he's been playing quite well. But obviously, you're going to bring Oscar back. It's an obvious move. But the interview, and you're going to pull it up, I believe, Neo. I'm going to quickly read it out. Read it out for you right now. An article about things with Titans. Oscar is saying that things weren't working out with Titans from the start. When they sent money, they promised even more, but they didn't even send any in the end. Sonny was owed and is owed at least $100,000. He says that ex-Mouse Sports teammates Sonny and LMBT never mentioned any problems to him when nudging him to play with them and to leave Sinners. And if there was an indication of money issues beforehand, they would have stayed clear of this, friendship or not. He says that MSL is stuck in the past with his tactics. The team was consisted of aggressive players that wanted to create opportunities in the moment, but MSL plays predetermined tactics which suited nobody. When someone wanted to debate with him, it would end up with him not speaking and tilted. That is a bad quality of an IGL.
Yeah.
He says that he feels stupid for taking this offer and regrets it, and he hopes that back in Sinners he can have a reunion with Zero and push the team forward again. And I hope so too. But that is some pretty damning stuff, right, guys?
Yeah, I mean, start us off, Paladin, but that is a rough one to read already.
The MSL the section is actually very interesting to me because I think a lot of the conversation around MSL was that he was going to be stuck if he was given another lineup with this very execute heavy style of gameplay. And I think he did a couple of interviews with Thorn and the like, and he was like, yeah, I'm doing a lot more in my game where I'm adding a little bit more default heavy protocols, a little bit more faster play, trying to update myself towards the meta. I mean, even his YouTube kind of suggests that as well. And this is kind of like damning evidence that says that MSL will not return to a top team for the rest of his career. I think he's done and dusted. This is pretty damning of an interview, especially if you're having Oscar say such a thing, which is the easiest
Oscar
AWP player to set up.
Things, I will say. Oscar is known for sometimes stirring a little bit, but
that is true.
I agree.
I think individually, though, the way Oscar approaches the game, he is one of the easiest players to set up. You don't really have to micromanage him by any means. I mean, honestly, most of these players, beyond Super IMO, you don't really have to micromanage. They've all had, I mean, Sunny's been a part-time IGL as well on Ents. Like, I don't think it's been an issue. And so overall, like for all of these players, I mean, this is an opportunity for them to kind of break out and reclaim lost glory of all these players on Titans, because they're kind of misfits, right? And you want to work back into the good steads of some of these players. But at this point, it's kind of done and dusted. I don't think I can really write home about any of these players, bar Oscar. I think Oscar still has what it takes. As far as what is it going to do to Sinners themselves, I think that they've kind of hit their ceiling. I mean, you don't necessarily have a player beyond Oscar to really rely upon. I think the Neofrag hit is much bigger than the AWP hit. And you can definitely see that in terms of their form. That even when Forsey was playing well, they still kind of had very okay performances. I will say that the cool caveat is now you have the reuniting of Zero and Oscar, which is always super exciting for historical Mouse Sports fans. But whether or not that'll actually result in anything, I don't necessarily think so.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, I'll come on to it in a little bit, well, just after this, but Sinners were always one of those orgs that really impressed me, especially when I was starting off my career, or kind of, just in the early stages of it, because when I was starting, I started late 2020, and of course for late 2020 and basically all of 2021, there was 3 organizations that were, in my eyes, seen as the best in my tier of tier 2, which was Sinners, Copenhagen Flames, and Tropic. Those 3, they were the gatekeepers, the guardians of tier 2. If you could beat those guys, then you can beat those guys consistently, then you're maybe seen as a team who could potentially go further than tier 2. So and that was when Oscar was just unstoppable. And of course, as you mentioned, I think losing Neofrag is even more, I think, the more important loss actually for this side. But yeah, I mean, it's a pretty rough listen, right, in the sense of I mean, we all kind of heard about the finances of Titans, about how much they were paying them. I think that I got leaked in some way, and everyone was saying, like, that's a lot of money for a team that do we ever see them play? I mean, when we did, it was, very abruptly, and they would lose. So I mean, they weren't. It wasn't even like they were
CCT play-ins.
exactly. Like we didn't even really see them put like the hard yards in the graft in terms of playing. Regularly tier 2. I mean, if they were playing regular tier 2, I mean, everything from CCT to EDC to Elisa and whatnot, then I'm like, okay, cool, fair enough. This like gamble might pay off because you need to just get reps under your belt. But we didn't really see that. So it seemed like not only was the team not working, but how much effort they were putting in and everything all and above. I think Oscar's the only redeeming factor for me. That still, I always thought Sonny was on a downhill spiral anyway post end. So I never really, I'm not really too kind of fussed about that one. But MHL's done, as we can see. I think that's the proof in the pudding for me that he's no longer got to play. Especially I spoke recently to Mezzi, one of the I think better up and coming IGLs in the world right now, going from like a star player to an IGL. It takes quite a lot to do, and he was saying that the meta at the moment, the way it is, and the way it probably will be for a long time, is it's not at all based on executes. It's all based on in the moment plays and being super versatile and mid round calling in a way, right? That's what you're saying. Like that is tier 1 CS. It's mid round calling. Who can mid round the best? And I think. Essentially, in a way, the fact that MHL is still in such an outdated playstyle, which hasn't been around for a good couple of years now, already shows that he hasn't even bothered to try and adapt as much as he said he has. So as it worked, and with the puzzle pieces he had as well, he should have been way better. So that's where you do look towards the IGL because they had the right players there to at least make it a competitive tier 2 side, and the fact that it wasn't already in itself is maybe a little bit of a faux pas where you're like, okay, that's concerning, but who knows. I want to move on if everyone's done with that one onto to my one, which is actually in a way I've kind of already alluded to them, is the mighty Copenhagen Flames. And there's a reason why I wanted to bring these guys up, because I think first of all it's testament that they're my highlight basically for this week. I've got a highlight and a low light. I'll bring them back to back. But my highlight, I wanted to bring in Copenhagen Flames because, first of all, just a lot of props to the organization. So 2 years ago, they rebuild. They keep only Yabi and Nikodos, and they bring in these 3 new guys around them, right? And this is a roster that ends up going to back-to-back majors. Most people only kind of saw them locked in as tier 2. So that in itself was unbelievable. I think Devorborg did some unbelievably good work to find these guys. Your Zyphons, such a youngster coming through. Roy as well, who many people at the time as well, because he was I think when he got picked up, he was 26, 27. People were like, oh, he's done. His career's over. But as we've seen with players like Jax, it's not always the case, right? They still got a bit of life in them. The old dog still fights. For me, for Copenhagen Flames, once this roster went their separate ways, to Fnatic and to whatever, I was part of the people that was like, yeah, maybe it's done, right? Maybe Copenhagen Flames will just kind of fall away into obscurity, potentially have an occasional tier 2 run and be here, there, and everywhere. But it's not to be. They have looked really good. They have managed to kind of find a bit of a mismatch of Danish-speaking players, of course, Regali being from Romania, and it's worked so well. This side continues to impress me. And as someone who watches a lot of the tier 2 space, they play really well, seriously good Counter-Strike, better than the majority of tier 2. Hence why, they're just outside of the top 30. And I can see a real world in which they get back into it. And I was speaking to Devorborg as well, not when he left Copenhagen Flames, and he was saying that, one of the, if you had to rebuild again, first place picking up is T&B. If you had to pick up an IGL, it would be Bird from Sky. And then, Regali, of course, we know what he was like in the academy time. He had a little bit of a stint with the first team, but of course, it was only, very temporary. But he's talented, and seriously talented at that. So for me, Copenhagen Flames have to be my highlight just because they're success story. They've got now back-to-back wins in the 2 tournaments that they've played, which was CCT, Central Europe, where they beat X-Finalists.
They've been owning CCT.
Yeah,
they're winning everyone.
Yeah.
North Europe, Central Europe, South Europe, they're winning all of them.
Yeah.
It's genuinely impressive.
It's so easy for them, right? And when you look at the teams they're taking down as well, there's some pretty big hitters. I mean, I still class X-Finalists as one of the better tier 2 teams. I think they continue to be really, really impressive, despite all the problems they went through and losing the organization and changes and whatever, they still continue to be so competitive. And of course, they made it to the final. I think 9 is a very competitive team to take down. They won Challenger League, the most season 42. I mean, that in itself is a fucking huge testament. And then you look towards EDC recently, right, where they won that one out, and some of the teams they took down along the way. Again, pretty impressive. I think they're only lost to Eklot, potentially, a bump in the road, but then flawless aside from that, and taking out K23, Sinners in the tier 2 space, relatively impressive. Sangal again, with Fuzi now in this team, I think that's actually very impressive.
By the way, Sangal game, I casted that map. They had a scheduling conflict, and Sangal got a default on map 1, and Copenhagen Flames are like, okay, we'll win the next map 16-9, 1917, no worries, we don't need the opening map to play this game.
Exactly.
And then they won the event. They've been so good.
So, yeah, for me, they have to be my highlight, because I'm continuing to be impressed, and it'll come out probably the next video after this. And I sat down with Regali and I was speaking through this only 2 days ago from time of recording. I sat down with Regali and I spoke to him and talking about like the team, what's going right and wrong. And from a guy who had a rough stint with the Fnatic main team, he got a lot of flack because he wasn't up to the level then, and now he's come through and he's only had good things to say and everything seems to be super positive. I think there's a world in which this side, and he was kind of saying like, oh yeah, we're going to be at the Blast RMRs, like the close quals, like no problems. Like that level of confidence is such a good thing to see out of a player who lost a lot of confidence.
He's the next Romanian player to make a major in my view.
Oh,
absolutely.
100%.
After Laurenex and Emma, who sort of made waves in the scene. Yeah, absolutely. I think they're fantastic. And it's funny, isn't it? Because going into this particular edition of the Copenhagen Flames, I really thought that it was slightly worrying. I thought that Regalia would have to hard carry all the time.
I agree.
TMB, of course, I yelled a bit in Mad Lions. Borup was not necessarily a star player anymore. Rals, I yelled a little bit in Sprout and wasn't necessarily a star player anymore. But they're obviously now all those issues are sort of handed over to Bird from Sky.
Yeah.
I mean, Bird from Sky's doing it again, isn't he? He's just doing it again.
He is
some tier 2
comfortably
players.
one of the best IGLs. I don't even think in tier 2. I think whenever anyone's worked on the Bird from Sky, they've only come out and said, he's a genius. Like, he's just next level. I mean, so much so that your IGL is being called a hacker on a regular basis. I mean, that's how good he is. And I think it's testament to his work ethic as well, which is why I really like this Copenhagen Flames side, because they're going back to the Copenhagen Flames of old, back in when I started my commentating career, when they played every single game that was possible. Everything. They would do 3 best of a day like it was nothing, right? It's work ethic, it's grind, it's graft, and I think it's what's necessary for tier 2 teams to move up in towards tier 1. So I'm just really, really impressed with what they do. They continue to impress me. Everything that's coming out of the camp as well seems to be so positive. So I would actually be very surprised if on this current form, unless there's some major hiccups, if they don't make it to the close quals of the RMR. I mean, guys, I'm not going to say anything about them making it to the major because very early doors. But I think the way they're playing, they should make it to the open quals. So
I think that the whole IGL angle is one that a lot of people kind of overlook. I mean, you were mentioning it previously, but we've had situations where this has happened before and it just doesn't work. Like you think about the original OG lineup with NBK, Valde, and Alexi B, who all 3 of them were all IGLs in their previous lineups before they entered. And it didn't work. There were too many cooks in the kitchen. Eventually, slowly but surely, all of them left. It was just Alexi B that was left on the lineup, and he was the primary caller. And I think that these guys also had that kind of growing pain. But the lucky part for Bird from Sky is that these guys are much younger in comparison to NBK and Valde, who have been through a lot more in their career. They have a lot more of a chip on their shoulder that, like, look, hey, I've done it with this organization. I've done it with these players. I can definitely add in my 2 cents here. But these players have played underneath organizations that don't necessarily have that same kind of tenure or praise, that they can kind of bow their head in this situation and say, look, Bird from Sky, you take us to victory, and we can role play out and figure things out that way. And it makes sense. The lineup actually makes sense now. And I had just major issues with the firepower on this squad, but it looks like they've all found a way to play a little bit more selflessly. And Regali now looks just so comfortable. I mean,
he said it himself. He said he's never felt as comfortable ever in his career as does now.
This is like a massive boost for his career, because not only does this prove that he could play in a potential English-speaking roster, what he did with Fnatic, but now at the same time he can also switch to a Danish roster, and that completely changes the scope of like his career. He can go to anywhere that he really pleases, and that's just
Exactly.
huge for a player as young
especially
as
in
him.
tier 2. Yeah, especially in tier 2. We just see it a little bit more, but I think the same can be said from Sky. To be fair, like
I
it
love
feels like at this
Sky.
point
Yeah.
he can take any roster in tier 2 and make them a CCT winner, which is enough
Yes.
for huge opportunities in the future. So genuinely high props to them, and yeah. Anyway,
I think if I had to like, obviously, you know, I do my interviews and I like saying that he's got to be up there in terms of people I want to interview, just because I want to pick his brain about how he's so good at what he does. And just a last thing on this, I think also a lot of praises to be given to the organization Copenhagen Flames, because you know, after losing that caliber of team that they lost, you know, a top 8 Antwerp, right? You're like, shit, like how do we do better than this? That was a fairy tale of a team, right? To kind of the graph that they went through and they lost them. You're thinking, you know, maybe that's them done kind of way, you know, it being competitive in a sense. And I also thought as well, and I was under the illusion that, or not illusion, but that Devorbo did all of the talent scouting. It was just solely on him. But, you know, Cube, who manages them as well, he's also got a keen eye for good CS players, because he's found a very mixed match. I mean, Borup had, you know, he faded away a little bit in towards, you know, struggling in tier 2, and he's managed to make him into a comfortable player once again. He's got all of them confident. So yeah, they're my highlight. I just think they're really, I'm really enjoying the work they're putting in there for me.
Yeah,
and I'm glad to see, I'm hoping to see more from them, because their skill ceiling just keeps getting higher and higher every tournament.
Yeah, and I'll end off this segment by saying, you know, once again, the Copenhagen Flames story, we all know the meme at this point, don't we? The one player from the original Copenhagen Flames team to not make that Bayern Rio Major was Huxley on G2, and who would have thought that going into it, right?
Exactly. Right, so I want to move on to a low light now. This one, we've already had this conversation in our little group chat, but this one is... Oh, it makes me feel sick. But my low light is the entire organization that is Eternal Fire. What a dumpster fire, first of all. What a shit show. I mean, what a shit show. So,
you got Striker's tweet, have you?
Yeah, I've got Striker's tweet, and this is fantastic. So Major has been brought back in to IGL after being dropped all of not even a month ago. I think it was, what was it, like... oh no, maybe it was just about a month ago. But let's recap, right? So last 4 months for Eternal Fire. July 4th, minus Calix. July 8th, plus Major. Okay, I can see what we're doing there. Someone coming in to call a shot. You know, a known name in the Turkish scene coming through. July 10, minus Bishop, whatever. July 12, minus Xcloud, plus Paz, plus Hardstyle. Then October 8th, minus Major, plus Xcloud. So Xcloud has dipped off, and a month later back, or, you know, a bit down the line, back in. October 31st, same month, minus Paz, minus Hardstyle. November 3rd, minus Woxic. November 7th, plus Kalik. And November 19th, plus Major. So after dropping Major because of him, you know, their struggles within the RMRs, right? And this side being, I mean, a brutal mess within the RMRs.
He tweeted that he was going to retire, Major.
Yes, literally. And then it was just like, and Striker adds as well. That means it's been minus Calix, plus Major, minus Major, plus Major, plus Paz, minus Paz, plus Hardstyle, minus Hardstyle, and minus Xcloud, plus Xcloud, all within the span of 4 months. This is just awful.
And overall, the only change that's actually been made, as it's put actually in one of the replies, the final product is actually only minus Woxic plus Major in the end. I think that has to be in the end. Just looking at it from the outside, maybe there's so much mess with this team. It's because Woxic continued to be a part of it. Maybe he was the problem. Yeah. Who knows? We know he's a very not hot-headed. I think that's a bit harsh, but he wears his heart on his sleeve. That's for sure when he plays. It's making me wonder whether he was the issue and why Major didn't want to continue. Because I think we know that Xantares is not going to leave because he's like the main man on the team. He would have to be on a team better than Big again, I think, to consider leaving Eternal Fire. And of course, we don't know if he's confident in his English to go back to a big team again, as much as he was back then. But yeah, it's so strange. And I think, like, while this may be the correct decision, because there's a reason I put Eternal Fire to make it through the RMIs, because I saw them qualify through a really tough bracket to make Rotterdam. Yeah. ESL Challenger Rotterdam. Was it Rotterdam? Yes, it was Rotterdam.
Yeah, it was.
And I was very impressed, especially with Major as well, playing well in the IGL role. Of course, he does give himself some good positions. I think tends to give himself some good roles and positions as an IGL, which is probably what helps his stats. But I thought this was going to look great. I thought I was quite confident in it, and then it all just implodes in that matter, and they get rid of Major, and then they decide, okay, well, listen, we're gonna need you back, and I think, as I said, it's the correct decision. It makes sense, but from the outside, it looks awful, and they're a bit of a laughing stock because of it, unfortunately.
I think also as well, just for me, they start to really take the mantle of EG as being worst run organization, because god damn it, like this was. Like, just, yeah, like you said, from an outside perspective, I mean, we don't know the internal affairs, right? I think, also, wasn't there, I think we had this conversation, you know, just before when this whole thing was coming out, wasn't there a whole thing about them not liking Major, like, as a person? I swear there was something released. I definitely remember reading something about someone not liking Major, like, not even his calling style, like, just him. Like, they like, there was, like, arguments within the Turkish scene, and like they didn't like him, which is kind of why he went to Valorant as one of the things as well, because like a lot of the CS players just didn't like him as a person, right? And now he's come back in, with the only thing being Woxic. Maybe him and Woxic were the main brunt of the argument.
That's what I'm saying.
Him and Xantares are actually okay, but I mean, Paladin thoughts, but I think this pretty rightfully goes towards a low light. I just to add to it as well, they haven't won a game in the last, God knows, like 2-3 months. Like, the last game they won was against Ents and ESL Rotterdam, and that was on the 16th.
1-2. Yeah.
I mean, that was on the 16th of the 10th. So, you know, it's not looking pretty, is it?
Yeah.
How petty do you have to be to bench yourself, say that you're going to retire, and then move to Valorant, not get any offers in Valorant, and then say that you're going to retire completely from all esports? And then after Woxic benches himself, you're like, you know what?
I'll give it
guys,
a go.
It was all a prank. I mean, I loved Eternal Fire. They're my favorite organization. I love these guys.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to be back.
It's a shame because I love Xantares, but
yeah. Do you know what's funny as well? Just on a Valorant thing, for those who know the context there, within VCT, which is obviously the franchising, there is just, you know, there's 10 teams from EMA. 2 of the 10 are Turkish. BBL and Foot, right? So there's plenty of opportunity if he was good enough for him to get into Valorant. So he obviously wasn't good enough he obviously wasn't good enough at all in Valorant. I didn't see any of his Valorant work, but there's 2 teams that are Turkish speaking, which is pretty significant for 2 out of 10. So obviously, yeah, it's just a meme. I think obviously there's definitely a world in which Major is also a real issue as well, just as a person, inconsistent, not in terms of just in the server, out of it too.
Yeah, I think at this point now, I don't think they can kill anybody on the server. Like, they genuinely just don't have enough firepower at this point. No. You have Emor calling, who I already thought, or sorry, not Emor anymore. Sorry, who was IGLing before, but now Major is calling. I think Emor and xCloud, I think I could only handle one or the other. I think that with both of them on the team, it's just a huge, significant drop-off in performance.
Yeah.
Calix was already trying to be a role player. Won't be enough firepower, and it's just going to have to be the Xantares show again. Who's opping on this team? I don't know who is opping on this team anymore.
Emor can. I know he can.
It's been very just like average to me. Like I don't know. It makes sense why they're not winning any tier 2 games or any DCCT games, because these guys are fraggers, man. Some of these teams that they're playing up against are just heavy hitters in terms of firepower that there's no way you're going to get to a qualifier at this point, because you don't have enough to kind of grind down some of these series. It's just not going to happen.
No, I agree.
And to me, it doesn't feel like this team is serious anymore. Like I don't externally, whatever I'm seeing, it just screams that they just don't have an identity as to how they want to approach the game or how they want to win. That's the thing that it boils down to. It doesn't feel like this organization wants to win. That is my biggest issue with this, because it sounds harsh, but at the end of the day, if you want to win, you put aside your differences and you play with each other. Exactly. You realize that the core of Major, Xantares, and Woxic should be enough to get you guys into a position where you can compete. You get maybe xCloud in there. You maybe get another youngster, maybe like a Soulfly.
Well, Soulfly was the one I was going to suggest. I think in terms of his role and rating, he's perfect. But do they have the pulling power?
Why would you shut up and you play the game? You play the game and you try to get Turkey back on the map. Beyond that, it's going to be the same shit where you have Xantares on an international team and you're like, oh my god, Xantares and Woxic are playing so good on one international team. I wonder if they played together, maybe they would accomplish things. Like, you wouldn't have that conversation. You just
No.
put up or shut up.
Put up or
That is
shut
as
up.
simple as.
Love it.
Like that is my issue with this whole thing. Like I can't take this team seriously anymore.
It's a
I don't
meme.
really
It
care
isn't.
about it.
They've
I'm
made their
done.
major once. They found their stickers. Ironically, they made their major without major. Haha. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, man. Like, it's just ridiculous. So they've got their stickers once. I think that's as most they're ever going to be able to do. At least for the next few weeks, anyway. Next few sort of 6 months maybe.
Yeah, I think it's done, but I think pretty deservedly my low light, just because it's also it's not only just badly like it's badly run and badly played. So at least in some cases you can say if the organizations run badly or people don't like the organization, which we see some of the tier 1 ones, at least they play okay. Same. I mean, this is just an absolute mess everywhere you look as well. So, I mean, Soulfly was the one I was thinking in terms of. I was thinking like who could come in to replace Woxic, not in terms of a role, but in just terms of firepower. And he's the only one. But I honestly don't think Eternal Fire now, in the mess that they are and the meme that they are as well, have the pulling power. While they are quote unquote the premium Turkish organization over Sangal, technically speaking, I don't think he would leave. If he got the offer, I think he would be like...
Sangal look better.
Shouldn't. No, he shouldn't.
He shouldn't.
Completely shouldn't leave. No.
Unless he's getting paid twice his wage, I don't think he should leave. I mean, he's got a good gig going there at Sangal. I mean, granted, like, they had a bit of a fairy tale when it came towards their run with the RMRs and stuff, and getting to the close RMR. But I think they're actually a fairly decent team. So we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, Eternal Fire my low light. I just think they've just been an absolute rough ride and watch, and I don't think there's much left of them. I think, to be honest, actually, my initial thing, I'm glad it kind of played out in a good way. So a long time ago, I watched obviously we saw the debate about them versus Blue Jays. So I can't actually remember what they were called back then, when they were like coming out saying they were cheating or whatever, and had this massive witch hunt for like Casanito and whatnot, who we actually now know Blue Jays is actually just a better team and always have been since, funnily enough as well. But I think that's when I got to the point of being like, maybe this team actually isn't going to work, and this last dance shit is actually just bollocks, because not only do they play bad and they are bad, but they're really insecure as well, and we can see that with the weird personal relationships and changes that happen and people leaving because of arguments. I think they need to sort themselves out before they even consider playing CS at a good level. So that's my rough one. Either way, we can move on. Pardon, you got a little segment for us?
Yeah, my segment is kind of a little bit broader. It's not necessarily something specific, just heading into the end of the year. But we're heading into a situation where I think we have a very unique storyline, like a big overarching narrative for CS in general. And it's that the younger players that we have in our scene now are kind of rising above the kind of veterans in the scene that have built their legacy for so long. And so basically I'm talking your phases, your Navis, your Vitalities. All these players that have such storied lineups and are expected to win titles are now not able to actually win said titles, and you have teams like Heroic, teams like Outsiders that are stashing away some of these titles away, and deservedly so. I think especially the Heroic title over FaZe. FaZe played a very good final. Heroic were the better team on the day. They showed that they were more clutch. They showed that they have a better system. They have more reliable players on the day, and so overall, I think they completely deserve the #1 ranking right now, at least with the current influx state of CS right now. And overall, it brings under scrutiny of all of these older players, your Kerrigans, your Reigns, your I mean, honestly, you can even argue Twist, Simple, Electronic. I mean, all of these players are so old in comparison to some of these younger players. And so basically, my whole highlight is that we are at a situation where the roles have been reversed, where the young guns are on top, and they are tasked with becoming these kind of grizzled veterans that cannot be phased by the kind of old guard now. It's very interesting how things are right now, and I don't necessarily know where things are going to go. Are the youngsters going to stay at the top of CS? Are the old guard going to have the type of redemption that they're looking for? And do we start that narrative with the World Finals? Like, it's very interesting with the kind of space that we have, because it's very up in the air as to where things go.
I think we're also in a position as well. I think we will touch on this a little bit more later on about when kind of Lornas was saying about how he doesn't like how there's no, one out and out dominant team. what does the kind of the future look like? For maybe we're in a point where some of these players, I mean, Carrigan's probably actually not even a bad example, where maybe we don't even realize it yet, but we're actually on the last limbs of his career, like the last kind of few steps. Maybe obviously I know he is getting up there in terms of age, but with FaZe just coming off the back of an era and being super competitive and whatnot, you thinking that he's eternal, he continues being so good, but maybe right in front of our eyes, without us really realizing, some of these old guards, like we like to say, are falling away, and actually this is the beginning of the end, but we haven't really kind of clocked onto it. I think in some cases we definitely have, like anyone who was in the quote-unquote last dance. I think we all knew that absolutely fuck all was going to happen from that, and as evidently seen with both the two Brazilian teams going 0-3 in the closer on Mars. So exactly kind of as, or not closer on Mars, the first stage, you know what I mean? So those was evident. We knew that when Fallen he moved on from Liquid and he made this whatever team, that he was gone. His career was past the point of being successful. But maybe some of those guys who we still think have success in them, potentially actually we just kind of maybe a bit of nostalgia factor plaguing our eyes, where actually maybe they're done. I potentially even another person to kind of bring into that fray is Apex, right? I think Trav, you were saying that you can consider a world in which there's a French last dance, prior to the major, where Vitality play bad, and I was fully on there with you. I think there was actually a world in which that was a thing. But maybe he's one of those players who he's been around for a long time, and maybe he's the next tank. He's the next RPK.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because I actually made this point early on in this very podcast about players who are sticking around and impressively sticking around as well. With the era we're in now, we're seeing the last, quite genuinely, the last dance of some of the legends, right? I mean, we're looking at now, for example, Crims. He needs a new team around him. He can't have the old god anymore. He needs a new boys around him to be able to still perform. So what I have to say is it's still a very good level to make playoffs of a major again is a huge success for that team. Yeah. But he can't be with the old guard anymore. It has to be one guy from that old era with a bunch of new guys. And the selection of players that you look at now who from like the old days who are still playing well, it's literally you could probably class Xantares in that, to be fair, just not as a higher level. You've got Xantares, you've got Crims, you've got Elige, you've got to some extent Apex, but he's IGLing, so it's a bit different now. And he can have very poor games, as we all know. Who else can you think of? I mean, Nitro is obviously IGLing. I'm more thinking of Riflers. I mean, Simple's been around for a long time, but he is an AWPer. That's slightly different. I'm thinking of Star Riflers that are still around to this day. It's a very small list that are still left in the elite tier. And that's why if you are still in that elite tier, I'm going to give you huge props. I mean, even Electronic, right? Electronic's been around for a really long time. NAF has been around for a really long time. Just going down the list now. Dupree, been at every major. Impressive. Magisk, impressive. They've been around for a lot longer than you actually realise when you truly think about it. Through so many different metas, so many different eras, and that's why it's extra impressive that they can still perform well. But yeah, I agree with what Paladin said. I think the split now is not really a split anymore between the old guard and the new guard. It's sort of like more 60-40 new guard with 40% of the old guard left, sort of keeping a solid handlehold in the scene at the top level.
No, I agree. I mean, Paladin, obviously, this being your point, what do you think is going to become the new norm? Like, do you think it's maybe like the beginning of the end for some of these guys?
So we're getting to a point where a lot of these players, these younger players, have gotten a lot of LAN experience. Now you can say that Stown, Testes, Shush have all played in enough LAN events to start performing. I mean, that's why we're putting Cloud9 under such scrutiny, right? They're getting into so many winnable scenarios and they can't close things out, even if they are looking like a very, very solid team. And I mean, even players like on Mouse, I have my own issues with Mouse as far as tactics are concerned, but as far as players are concerned, they're all very young and they're also slowly starting to figure out how to play on LAN. I mean, and in the CIS region right now, you have just absolute tanks in terms of emotions. I mean, Outsiders, none of those players are phased. Fame and Norbert playing in their first ever major are just absolutely cruising through, winning their first title. You have Spirit with Siren and Patsy and Magic's Chopper and Wonderful, not Chopper. But still, all of these young players are finding ways to buck the trend of previously. You would have a situation where you would have these players debut on LAN, and the reason why people wouldn't take chances on some of these players is because they would crumble under the pressure. That is why, I mean, even in some of NA's biggest roster moves, you had Stewie coming on to C9. He was largely dogged by the community because he was simply just a player that played through the pug system. He played through in a very unorthodox style, and he wasn't proven in LAN situations. But obviously, that is where players like Stewie decide to buck that trend, where they break through and they start performing with their same antics that they pulled off in pugs. They could pull it off on LAN too. Players like Rops, who were deemed cheaters and would just rise through the ranks via FPL. And are now one of the greatest players that we have in our scene right now. So I think that overall we're finally finding that shift of players that have adapted mentally in how to play in these big pressure cooker environments. And it's actually some of the old guard that are actually crumbling in certain scenarios that feel a little bit uncomfortable when we
Shox
get
can't
into
do it anymore. Shox is gone.
Yeah,
Shox
yeah.
can't do it anymore. He's
Shox
gone.
is irrelevant. I mean,
Yeah,
even
gone.
players like Zipnix,
Zip.
who are largely dogged upon by the community, he's not any sort of a clutch minister anymore. I mean, that category has been given to players like Shiro, right?
Yes,
That or players like Shush on Heroic. On phase, you have players like Brokey in the clutch with post plant scenarios. So there's so many, or even Perfecto on Navi. It's not even the older players on some of these squads. It is very much the younger generation, and I think that we are slowly but surely going to find ourselves in 2023 where it's the year of the younger player, and
People are
it's
going to
year
want to take a
of
risk.
yeah, for sure. And I think obviously you have this situation with the international rosters trying to take risks by buying younger players that can speak English. And I think more so we're going to continue leaning in that direction where all of these players that are younger and that can speak English are going to just be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
And you just give them one major cycle. I'm telling you, the second major cycle is going to be cutthroat. Maybe not Paris,
Yeah.
because I think we're going to have a little bit more rebuilding from some of these teams. But I think a lot more risks are going to be taken in that second major cycle. And we're going to have a situation where we're going to have a lot of younger players in that top 8.
When the inevitable thing happens, where some of these old god rosters who are very dated in their mindset try and go to Paris and either don't go to Paris or get there and get rolled, right? That's when, as you mentioned, in that second term of the season where things get really spicy. And I think generally the mindset will change, and for the better as well. It should be a reliance on, young talent. And you can see in a way teams sort of doing that with kind of G2 going for Manesi. I think that was, while he was statistically fantastic and he was very evidently very good, it was still a risk, right, to bring this guy into his tier 1 all the way from WePlay all the way up. And I think those risks do, for the most part pay off, and we're starting to see it now with the likes of your Mals and XTs, with those 3 going up, and of course Shuhi now doing it. It's only Shane who hasn't, of that 5 who's gone up, and then even the likes of Copenhagen Flames. Of course, I know Roy wasn't young, but Nicholas isn't that old. Zyphon's only like 18, Yabi's only 18. Those guys it's coming through, proving that granted some of them might only be, Lonks is fucking 17. He's a kid. So the fact that children are literally going to the major and being competitive should be all that needs to be said in terms of that. Well, funnily enough, we were also making the argument against Nipple for Na'Vi, saying that they need experience for bringing in Hobbit. That's more for the personal side of things, which that kind of side makes sense. But I think generally when you're looking towards kind of changing your team for the better, I think you have to now be looking towards not recycling the same shit at the top, and taking a risk basically, which is, I know, is quite tough for some of these big dated organizations.
And just to finish that off as well, like that's actually how I finished my cast on Espoo, Elisa Espoo, right? The stunning 25-23 Sprout Gaming Legion game, I sort of finished off and then ended before we went to the next game by saying, guys, look at this. This is the future of Counter-Strike. Refresh it to IJing this team. He's only 24. Yeah. He's got 3 youngsters who are not even 20 yet. Like, it's just superb performances from the future, and the Gamer Legion, of course, both these teams making a major. You're watching the future of CS. Some of these guys might be on FaZe in the future. It's as simple as that. I think Laurenex is a future FaZe player. I'm convinced that's going to be a thing one day.
Exactly. Well, we do have 2 more points. Our penultimate Travi, it's yours. You want to kind of bring up a question. I'll let you take the floor, mate. Go for it.
So it's a bit of a weird one because obviously, it's a Tommy tweet, Lurpis, of course, who's more known for tweeting about Tezza really these days than Counter-Strike. But really, I think the factor that I want to talk about is about the current level of play. Is it higher or lower than the past? And I think it's actually just interesting discussion point because, especially after Rio, people have looked at it and say, come on, like FaZe and Navi should be doing better than this. Where's their level gone? Yeah. Why are some seemingly bad teams like Heroic and Outsiders in a major final, for goodness sake? But I think in my case, it comes down to personal preference. I think the level can be considered definitely way higher than back in the old days. You just have to watch one demo of an old NIP match or an old Fnatic game to see the difference in utility usage, the difference in executes, the difference in team play. It was nowhere near the same meta, obviously, but also nowhere near the same level as it is now in terms of individual skill. At least I think. Compared to these days, at least across the board. Maybe the elite team in the world, the one elite team was up there, but as we've seen, these days they fall off. But when it comes to the argument about whether it's higher or lower than the past, the level has to be higher now. There's absolutely no doubt to me that the level is higher. Yeah. It's the thing that we've had this game now for so many years that so many new players who have been grinding it since they were really young and now are finally getting their chance are just so good that the level is sort of at that particular point where you need a huge factor in your team to be able to break through in certain events, especially like the major. We've seen it with the AWP IGL role, for example, of Cadian and James. Yeah. Those are the 2 roles that really help them break through. And as you mentioned, the thing that Launders said, it comes down to personal preference. Do you like the fact that nearly there's a selection of 10 teams, if they show up, can win an event, or do you prefer an era of a domination era like an Astralis or a Fnatic, where you get to see a new team eventually overthrow the kings of the era and it becomes a big factor? But I don't know. I actually prefer it as it is now because there's more unknown to it, but I get both sides of the story at least.
I definitely think the level of play has gotten higher. There's no denying that. And you look at just the micro details of how these players approach the game. I mean, the average CS:GO player now watches demos, learns so much utility, works with a copious amount of staff members to basically put out the best player of themselves when you go in. I mean, there's so many different stories when you talk about just old NIP players just slouching, and even when they were hitting the kind of the tail end of their career, they were just refusing to catch up and instead just continue to play their own game and just get phased out of the scene. And now at this point in time, you can't do that if you're a player, no matter how old or how young you are. Your reputation can evaporate in an instant. And so you have to be at the tippity top of your game. And even tactically, you can just see all of these squads, even if you want to talk about a roster that isn't quote unquote tactically developed, they still have a very in-depth playbook. And you can definitely see that there's enough variety in how these players approach the game. And there's so much autonomy for players themselves. You see so many strategies nowadays that isn't necessarily a micromanaging situation where Cadian's okay, Stown, Tessus, Shush, you're going to go to this part of the map, you're going to do this, and you're going to add 20 seconds, you're going to pull away. Sometimes he's look, I want to put Shush in connector. I want to put Yabi in the back of Monster on overpass, and I'm going to say, look, you can make any decision that you want. If you want to aggress Monster, if you want to pop flash your way through and try to make a play, you can do that. And that autonomy and giving players freedom of choice is telling me and suggesting to me that at this point in our game's life cycle, that everybody has some level of knowledge and definitely have the skills, the mechanical skills to back that up as well. And that in turn makes me feel as though that the game has definitely gone higher. And that's where you're getting situations where Heroic are toppling the likes of FaZe. They overall were the better team. It's not I don't think FaZe played a bad game by any means. I mean, maybe you had some individual discrepancies with kind of Brokey falling off in certain scenarios, or Rain having a bit of a lackluster performance in a map here or there. But at the end of the day, you're starting to see that this game is very much a team game. It's not necessarily a carry performance anymore, and that you need to have all the cogs turning together and all need to be on the same page in order for you to go over the top and to win a title. And that in and of itself is making me super excited that we're not having superstar carry performances now. While that is very awesome and cool to see,
Yeah.
we're also seeing the rise of 5 players across the roster pulling their own weight respectively. Obviously, Heroic and Outsiders respectively. Even FaZe having their own kind of system where you need all 5 players online to kind of do their respective job.
So, well articulated, Paladin. By the way, I appreciate that. That was, I think, better than how I said it. That was all my points that I was thinking of that you articulated well.
Yeah.
But what's your general opinion then? Do you want 10 teams that can win an S-tier event, or do you want 4?
I think this is personal preference. I think I think Launders came out and said he doesn't like that there's like in a way underdogs winning in that sense, or the fact that I know, especially when the open quals were happening, there was so many people were saying like they hate open quals because underdogs win, and like no one likes underdogs or whatever. I saw a lot of people kind of those pretty vague tweets. Just one thing to mention in terms of just to end off the point on Tommy's thing on my side with the is it better or worse than way back when? I think, Trav, the way you put it in terms of the fact that if you just go and watch an old demo, right, of like 2014 CS compared to now or whatever, it's a different world. Like, it was so much just like, go in, play trades, win out your jewels, that's it. The depth now is insane. And again, to add to kind of what you were saying, Paladin, in terms of like the way in which players go about playing now, it's no longer a case of where the IGL is the only one on the team who's cerebral and micromanages every other player, and you just kind of follow them like a robot following orders, where now it's the case of, oh, right, yes, you 17-year-old boy, I trust you to make the right decision because you know how to read a game just as well as I do, or maybe nearly up to the level I do. And the way in which players read the game now, it's just a general like rifler, for example, or a general support player, I would say is better than any player outside of an IGL from way back when, and that's the best thing. But to add to it as well, the best way I think is a way to judge whether the game's got better or where it's got is a better level than what it was, is the trickle down effect, because the level of tier 2 teams compared from now to then is insane, because they've been forced to step up and they've been forced to continue to improve the way the skill ceilings continue going up. And there was no notable tier 2 anything going on back then. Of course, granted, funding was obviously a big issue then, which is different now, but the level of tier 2 from back then compared to now is just monstrous, where the tier 2 sides now would be comfortably as good as some of the tier 1 teams back then, just in terms of the tactics, the depth, the way in which they play, the way in which they read a game. So that's why I think is the better way to kind of read the game. Yeah. But in terms of like who you want to see, whether it's like, I think some people were saying this major is shit because it wasn't FaZe Na'Vi in the final, and I can see what they're trying to say there, but I've always been the other side, where I like homegrown stories and fairy tales and the underdogs proving that they can play up to the big dogs. So I think it is personal preference. My personal is that I like that it's open. I like that it's unpredictable, because I am one of the people who gets bored when it's predictable. Like, I think for me, Stockholm was an amazing major for me just because it's my first time major I got to go and see in person, but it was predictable. Everyone knew Na'Vi was going to win. It was never, ever, like, no one like in their right mind could have comfortably said that anyone was going to beat Na'Vi at that point, when they were just untouchable, and they were untouchable for that entire thing. I mean, the only challenge then was Vitality in the quarterfinals, and they romped them. So I think for me, I like the unpredictableness just because it keeps me on my toes. And we were kind of, I mean, look at the major for us. Every day we were like, fuck's sake, I'm not getting a diamond coin. And it was like, that's funny. Like, so
years ago, the Gamer Legions and Bad News Eagles of the world would have been 16-5, 16-5 by the top teams.
Yeah.
That just doesn't happen anymore. Games are close. If you have a basic level of understanding of how to play top tier Counter-Strike, even as a youngster like Stewie is, right? Mm-hmm. You can make something happen, and he absolutely did. It made waves at that major. But that's just kind of, I just kind of wanted to pick your brains on that tweet, because sometimes it annoys me when people say, is the lower less? Is it more boring? Like, I just enjoy everything, man. Like, please, just take it in and enjoy it. Like, I don't like complaining too much.
I think it definitely is preference. I like when a tournament is open, but I love and revere the history so much that I love the kind of conversation that we have to have when we talk about eras and when we talk about dominant teams in history. And then when you talk about how were they dethroned, I mean, that's always a very fun conversation to have.
Yeah.
But in the moment, it's never that enjoyable, to be completely honest with you. I mean,
agree.
when you're actually seeing these teams take shape and start to win everything, majority of people actually start to get very bored with themselves. They don't like when certain teams win. I mean, they certainly say it after the fact that they would like to have one team to be the favorite, but in the moment, I don't think nearly as many people respect that number one team as much as they need to.
Yeah.
And give them enough credit. I mean, you think about the kind of era that, or kind of mini era that Fnatic had. I mean, even when I was kind of in, like, watching CS, I stopped watching CS because I was just so bitter that Fnatic was winning everything, and I was like, what's the
Exactly.
point of watching this? This team is shit.
Ronnie?
All
Ronnie,
they
is that
do is
you?
run.
Yeah.
And they're oh my god, they run out with Tech 9s. They play with the most broken guns in the game. They just W key everywhere and they win all the time. JW is so annoying. I hate this team. But I mean, you take a step back, you look at it from a bird's eye view. Fnatic revolutionized the game. They found a way to play in a default heavy style. They found a way to play with a more hive mind type of Counter-Strike, where you have 5 individuals that aren't necessarily the most cerebral, but oh my goodness, when they put those 5 players in the server, they're absolute geniuses, and they look like they can come through any deficit, and that's always super interesting to me. I mean, even teams like Na'Vi with the kind of undefeated streak that they went through to win Stockholm, like that conversation was so exciting, and it sucked that the kind of geopolitical situation had to happen in the way that it did, because you were starting to have that budding conversation of who will dethrone Na'Vi. I mean, all these teams are starting to engage themselves in building all these roster to dethrone that top team. And when it doesn't go right, you're like, oh my God, this team is really just that good, that they are still ruining other people's projects and ruining other people's big time contracts, getting splashing all this money to get in your Rapses and your big time players to solidify titles to dethrone them. Like, that concept is just super exciting for me. But I think as a viewer, I think I prefer the aspect of this tournament is wide open. You don't know who's going to win. You don't know who you can actually put your chips out on the table. I mean, even heading into Rio, you saw like the bookmakers odds for everything. I think outsiders were like not even in like the top 7 of people that were that were supposed to be
even
favorites
though they've
to
had
win.
quite a few wins under their belt in the more tier point 1.5.
I mean,
1.5.
nobody ever puts them in that conversation, right? And that's just really exciting that you have kind of an underdog story to come through.
The thing is, I understand people who were like, "Oh, it's not phased on RV," so I don't want to watch the 2 best teams in the world at the moment. So I don't care. I get what they mean by that, but I think just the variety is nice, because I think. Like, obviously, I think I always look back to like Astralis when they went on. They absolute tenure for a long time. It was actually fantastic to watch. I didn't get bored of it. But at the same time, it was quite cool. For example, having the storyline of a Vanguard have made a major final. Like, fair play. Like, I didn't expect them to be here. So like, even then you could kind of lean into like, there's a bit of variety. And I always like to liken things to real life sport, because obviously that's where I started for a lot of my for me. And football's a great example. And in England, for those who don't know, we have the FA Cup, right? And the FA Cup is it starts from Sunday League, from like John down the pub, playing centre back, morbidly obese, but giving it a good crack, right? And it's a way in which teams can go from potentially Sunday League and not even having seats in, like, it's just a field in a local park, to potentially being able to go a long distance. And I always think of like great examples of, like, there was one not even that long ago where Sutton United forced Arsenal to go to the Emirates to play, because they drew with them. And it was like Sutton United, who weren't even in league football, they were a non-league team, had somehow upset all the way through. And it was just like, it's a memorable story, because like no one will ever forget Sutton United, or people who follow the FA Cup will ever forget Sutton United's run through the FA Cup, because it was just like how they even got this far. The fact that they even got to like a round of 32 or whatever it was just stunning. So for me, I've always loved an underdog, just because I think it may be in a way that whenever I've played football or played anything competitively, because I've never been like the best. I've always known myself as a jack of all trades but master of none. I'm just okay at everything. I'm not great at anything. I'm just the most average person ever. So I've always felt like I'm an underdog. So whenever I make things work, I always like it. Whenever I watch TV shows as an underdog, I always root for the underdog, just because that's where I found home in it. I've liked it. So I guess it kind of depends on maybe life experiences as well. Maybe for someone like a Launders. I'm not saying he was giving everything on a plate, but maybe in some way he was, where it was like, he was always, obviously he's an unbelievable commentator. Maybe he always was a very good commentator in that way, and he was always like, he got a nice easy path. But I feel like, maybe I've had to work.
As he would say in his own words, I'm carried by Scrawny.
So maybe in his eyes, he's up there as one of the best, and he's had an easy route to it, where I feel like, I guess I've always seen myself as an underdog, so I've always likened myself to underdog. So I guess that's my viewpoint. I think it's personal preference, though. I don't hate or like anyone for their opinions in that sense. I'm not combative in a way. I just think it's personal, but that's mine. But I think if we're done that one,
have we got one thing left, haven't we?
One last point. Yeah. I think anyone want to bring this one in, Trav? You want to lead us in for this one?
Well, it's just something that Valve have done recently. Just the RMR system in general, right? It's the blog post here that says a new path to the majors. Starting with the 2023 Paris Major, we're going to change the way we invite teams to the RMRs. Previously, teams entered the RMRs by direct invitation or through a series of open qualifiers. For Paris, some teams who aren't directly invited will get to skip the open qualifiers. Teams that consistently perform well in Valve and third-party events will be directly invited to the closed qualifier. Here, they'll compete against teams that enter from an open qualifier. And they said they're going to release new details soon. But I think that's better, right? Because while it doesn't give some teams a free path, you don't want to see G2 in an open qualifier. I think that's just dumb.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as much as it was fucking hilarious to see Astralis get dogged through the open quals and nearly not make it because Brandenburg Blasters were giving them a run on overpass, taking them double OT, right?
Los Cagutos.
Yeah, Los Cagutos farming them out, having a motherfucker called Pop Dog be... Was it Pop Dog or something? Some dumb name like that. No, Pop Cake. My goat Pop Cake, right? Farming up against Astralis, right? Like those, as much as it was funny, I get, like, obviously, like I said, I like the underdog story, but you do want to see the heavy hitters because you don't want Brandenburg.
You want to see them earn it, right? You want to see them all. Like, if you want that underdog story to happen, you want them to earn it against the best teams.
I don't want it to be a flash in the pan as well.
Yeah, otherwise it doesn't really matter, right? It's like you're just playing who's ahead of you, but the teams that are ahead of you aren't very good. So why give them merit? But I think one aspect that I've seen a lot of people arguing against this change is that this gives more of an advantage to partner teams because majority of the tournaments are ESL and Blast, and so if you just attend these tournaments, you're getting points outright anyways to get to the closed qualifier. And I definitely see that. But look, I don't think this is a bad thing because if you're conjoining both the open qualifier teams that join into the closed qualifier direct invites, you're still going to have that situation where these teams have to be on their A game and still put out the best level of Counter-Strike. But it also avoids the whole ridiculous aspect of I'm going to be the first seed in Astralis and I'm going to have to go through 4 open qualifiers, and just because one guy had a life game and a best of 1 and didn't do anything else in the rest of his CS career beyond that.
Yes, literally.
And now I can't attend the major because of that. So I still think that you can have that crazy underdog story of a close qualifier upset and this team doesn't make it. And then, yeah, sure, they definitely don't deserve it. But it's kind of like the best of both worlds. You give an opportunity to some of these teams that weren't getting a direct invite but are still good enough to play in the RMR. And then you also have the open qualifier upstarts that could still ruin your day and have that dream run to make an RMR.
It allows for game allegiance stories to happen. And it's simultaneously still G2 hiccups to also happen as well. But on a closed qualifier stage, I think as well, it also will even the playing field in terms of we don't have for example, sides benched heroes maybe, making it, or of course then Illuminar, both of which were just what was the point in them being there? Or even maybe ecstatic, because I don't think they deserved it, to be perfectly honest. That Masonic core were very weak.
There were some qualifiers, especially the last few, which were a bit messy. I think it's really cool that a team like Fantasy with players who probably thought they'd kick the bucket, if the truth be told, which is anyone who doesn't know, that's a term for dying, I believe, a UK term. Their career's dying, but they still managed to make it and show themselves on a big stage. I think that's cool, but realistically, they didn't make any mark in the event. So you still have that opening, as you say, but at least it's I think not as extreme where you have to put some of those teams through the very first rounds of the open quals. So
I just put Ballon. It's the best of both worlds, and I think it is. I think it really does. I think it makes Blast even more of a watch in terms of, I think the RMR has some limited viewership in some of the games. Yeah, I mean, obviously you know a little bit better than me, but over towards NA there was a couple of just pretty weak teams who really didn't do anything there. I think it was Infinite.
Overall, I think we were given a lot of open qualifiers, and I think that overall all of the NA teams that I hope to have made it, like made the RMR stage, made it.
Yeah.
Obviously the results were another can of worms, but I think that our open qualifiers were just fine. But that's the thing. Like as long as Asia gets 8 spots, I think that's a rumor.
I hope they do. They deserve it, man.
That is all that I care about.
Yeah.
I think the NA situation is fine as it is. And all the teams that I think all the teams will make it, just because there are a lacking number of teams. I mean, there are some great individuals around the scene, but not necessarily teams. And I think that all the necessary teams will get through. I just want to see a more well-earned RMR spot from both of the Asian teams, and really make them go through their paces before they attend the major.
Exactly. I think hopefully Asia's done. So
yeah, one last point, and it's a breaking news point that I'll end off the podcast on. Literally 1 minute ago, Paladin, you'll be more interested in this one. DJ released from his contract with EG. Quick thoughts before I go and eat my dinner.
Yeah, this is EG's at a very interesting situation right now. They're actually playtesting a lot of different players within each different roster now. I think Viz was spotted playing with EG Black at one point, formerly of EG White.
Yes.
And at this point, I think they're trying to get George Snorts, formerly of Downs, into EG White or EG Black. I get the colors messed up.
The colors are so dumb.
Yeah, I know.
They're tier 3 EG team.
The thing is they are doing a lot. They're making moves right now to lock up a lot of different stars from North America, and I think DJ was one of those players that, while he was very consistent, he was not necessarily blowing anyone out of the server. And after their disappointing performance at Melbourne, I definitely think changes need to be made, because I want to see this team start competing at LANs a little bit more and start going deeper in these LANs. And going toe-to-toe, because it's been disappointing, to say the least.
And I want more Hex stories as well.
Exactly. If anyone's keeping an eye on EG, a next Hex story could easily be someone like Wiz. I've been a Wiz criticizer for years. Every single time I turned on this bloody stream, this kid was like 13 to 15 with no impact at all. Last few months, under Stan, right? If I'm not mistaken, he is playing with Stan on that particular EG. He's been looking superb. So keep your eye on that one, and that's my final little tip of the day.
Well, I think we're done, lads. That's been a marathon. 2 hours, 45 minutes. It's been an absolute marathon. But just before we end off, quick little 1 minute, 2 minute, anything you're working on the next couple of weeks that's worth kind of shouting out. Trav, what have you got for us?
My Asia ECL game is actually the last cast that I was scheduled for this year. So I'm hoping that maybe I'll have something in December, maybe a CCT playoff game. I'm having a chat with Hayes about that, see how that goes. But that could be my last one. So I might be pretty much making my sign-off tweet for the year on Twitter at this point. So we'll see.
Pardon.
Hopefully not.
What have you got for us?
I have a couple more ECL games in NA to take care of. The playoffs are still kind of undecided for, I think, majority of all the regions right now. So, I mean, maybe there'll be more on the horizon, but I'm pretty much done on the 7th of December, I believe, unless otherwise spoken. And so now it's kind of my favorite time of the year, where you can craft whatever narrative you want to craft in the player break, and watch whatever demos you want to watch. And so I usually get into a really healthy video upload schedule around this time, because I mean, I'm in university, so I'm on break as well. So these next couple of months, you're going to expect a lot of videos from me, all kinds of different types of videos. So look out for that.
Just finally for me, I mean, I've got a relatively stacked couple of weeks, to be perfectly honest. I've got ESL Prem finishing this weekend, which should be very exciting. See if Endpoint gets dethroned. They've won 9 out of the last 11, so it'd be kind of nice to see someone else take it. Who knows? They didn't finish number 1 in their groups. That's the first time that's happened since, like, years ago. And then aside from that, I'm doing Asia and EU ECL. And I guess it's probably even worth mentioning, since probably the next podcast we do will be after the time I've finished all of them. But I'll be doing playoffs as well for EU. And I'll be doing 8 days in a row of playoffs, or
Let's go.
something along those lines. No, 6 days I think actually. So, but a good amount of EU playoffs. I was actually originally on Asia, and then I got swapped because of conflicts with other casters doing other stuff. So I got, in a way, the upgrade to EU. So not going to complain at all. I've got like 6 days in a row of like EU playoffs. So I'll absolutely take that. But aside from that,
Good teams in that. Good teams in that.
some seriously good teams, exactly. So aside from that, pretty good. Yeah, pretty busy. So, and also I'll be doing a fairly decent amount of content as well. So all the good stuff. But lads, I think we are done and dusted. Thank you everyone for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure. Once again, this is episode 6 or 7 now. I think we're getting through them now. I can't remember. I think we're on 7, I think. So we'll get through.
Who cares?
Who cares?
It's still another episode.
Exactly. We'll be back in roughly about 2 to 3 weeks. You'll see us very, very soon. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for all the good stuff. Go and check out all of our socials there below. And of course, you can see them floating above our heads. And until next time, we bid you all farewell. See you soon.